Hello, my friend. Tonight we wander barefoot down marble corridors, glazed in candlelight, where the scent of rosewater clings to silk drapes and secrets hum behind every embroidered curtain. The year is distant, yet the night feels close. You trail your fingers along mosaic walls inside the Ottoman Empire's most whispered about institution, the imperial harem. Outside, the city of Istanbul sleeps under a velvet sky, but here, within Topkapi Palace, the night is very much awake. You probably will not survive this, at least not with your illusions intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I would love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge quietly down the hall of the concubines, aware of how muffled everything feels here, like walking inside a velvet-lined box. On paper, the Ottoman harem was simply the women's quarters of the Sultan's palace. In reality, it was a small city within a city, a floating theatre where gender, power, and sensuality danced in impossible circles. Thousands of women lived here. Concubines, mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, rivals, teachers, and spies. And each one held the potential to rewrite the empire's future. You are not alone, of course. Hidden behind a lattice screen is an older woman watching you. That is the Sultan's mother. She ruled this scented labyrinth like a CEO in a silk robe. She could raise a servant to power or exile a favored beauty with a nod. Forget romantic notions of harems as pleasure pits. This was corporate warfare in kaftans. Every inch of fabric mattered. Every blink meant something. And in the middle of it all, the Sultan reclined like a sleepy sun. Most people imagine him surrounded by hundreds of eager lovers fanning him with ostrich feathers. And yes, there were feathers, but also boredom, manipulation, loneliness, and surprising tenderness. Historians still argue whether the Sultan chose his favorites based on affection, politics, or astrological timing, or if he had any real choice at all. You pass the courtyard of the favorites, where women once waited, dressed in gold-threaded robes and bejeweled slippers, hoping for an invitation to the Sultan's chamber. A glance from a eunuch might mean a summons or a mistake. Tonight's lucky guest might be a girl from Circassia or Albania, sold by her own family and trained for years in music, manners, and the complicated science of making a ruler feel desired. But do not pity her just yet. Some of these women rose to become unofficial empresses, using flirtation as foreign policy. One such woman was Hurrem Sultan, a former concubine who not only married Sultan Suleiman, but also effectively co-ruled the empire. Her enemies whispered that she used witchcraft or love potions. More likely, she understood the palace's true economy. Attention. If gold was limited, seduction was infinite. In a niche by the hall, you see a small brass object shaped like a lamp. No genie inside. Just oil infused with cinnamon, clove, and ground ambergris. These mixtures were massaged onto skin before bedroom visits. Yes, the empire had a skincare routine. And no, you will not find this on TikTok. Suddenly, the walls feel closer. You are brushing past tapestries embroidered not with flowers or trees but with metaphors. Grapes being peeled, pomegranates split open, birds feeding each other figs. Nothing here says sex, and yet everything here whispers it. Even the architecture conspires in secrecy. Rooms within rooms, doors within walls, passageways only the eunuchs knew. Speaking of eunuchs, brace yourself. These were not merely guards, they were power brokers. Usually African and castrated before puberty, they existed in a strange no-man's land of gender and influence. One could rise to become the chief black eunuch, who had the Sultan's ear more often than the Grand Vizier. Picture it, a man denied family, desire, and legacy, yet shaping the empire's most intimate decisions. That kind of power is not compensation. That is vengeance in velvet. You hear a gentle splash. A concubine is being bathed in rosewater and goat milk. her body scrubbed with a mitt of raw silk. Cleanliness here is not just aesthetic, it is erotic. Touch is ceremony. Even bathing was a choreographed ritual, sometimes with spectators, sometimes with rivals peering through the steam. And do not even get started on the bedding. The Sultan's mattress was not just linen and goose down, it was astrological parchment beneath brocade. Timing a night of pleasure often involved horoscopes, especially under astrologers like Dervish Mehmed Effendi, who once claimed that Mars in Scorpio spelled passionate but short-lived affairs. Mercury retrograde? No intimacy tonight. Of course, not everything was symbolic. There were real affairs, secret pregnancies, occasional stabbings, accidental fires started by candles knocked over during particularly spirited arguments, or maybe something else entirely. And always there was surveillance. You never knew who was listening, which made moaning both an art form and a liability. Here is a fun fact. In some corners of the harem, girls practiced moaning lessons led by older concubines, not necessarily for realism, but for rhythm. The right tempo could apparently hypnotize a sultan, or bore him. Either way, it was a performance. You could say Ottoman foreplay was part opera, part espionage. Somewhere behind you, a door creaks, but you do not turn. You are too busy watching a pair of slippers embroidered with tiny tulips slip silently under a curtain. Someone has been summoned. And just like that, the night goes on. You stay low, ducking into a narrower corridor as voices trail off behind you. The scent of burning oud still clings to your skin, and you catch a flicker of gold embroidery as a eunuch passes silently ahead. You follow him, even though he does not see you. Or maybe he does. These men were trained to notice everything, even your breath. The eunuchs of the Ottoman court lived in a strange, in-between world, neither fully men in the eyes of society nor fully servants. They were gatekeepers of the empire's most intimate quarters. If the Sultan's heart lay somewhere in the harem, the eunuchs were its pulse. Quiet, constant, unrelenting. You enter a chamber dimly lit by oil lamps and cooled by thick stone walls. The man before you wears a dark robe and carries a scroll tucked into his belt. His title is simple: Chief of the Black Eunuchs. No Ottoman official held more access to the Sultan's private affairs. Not even the Grand Vizier. This man knew who visited the Sultan's bed. He chose which concubine would enter the royal chamber. And if he disapproved, the invitation simply never arrived. This power was immense. Yet so was the cost. Most of these eunuchs were enslaved boys taken from East Africa, castrated before puberty in brutal conditions, and then sold to the empire. Some never made it to Istanbul alive. Those who did were trained in languages, protocol, and surveillance. The lucky few rose through the ranks. Historians still argue whether these men were victims of power or masters of it. Were they hollowed out by the empire, or did they hollow the empire from within? It is a question that hangs heavily in this room, like the perfume soaked into its cushions. You glance at the furniture. Sparse, precise, each item in its place. There are no family portraits here, no letters from home, no tokens of affection. A eunuch's legacy was not one of bloodline or inheritance. His name lived only in the records of palace service. In some rare cases, he might sponsor a mosque or a fountain, but mostly, he vanished when the Sultan did. Yet their presence shaped everything. A particularly famous chief eunuch once plotted the removal of a rebellious concubine who had grown too bold. He arranged for her to be reassigned to a distant wing of the palace, citing poor health. The Sultan never questioned it. He had grown tired of her anyway. It was that simple. One signature, one glance, one voice whispering the right thing at the right time. And yes, these whispers could be bought. Bribery was common, though discreet. Foreign ambassadors often tried to gain favor through gifts. Silks, spices, gold rings hidden in bundles of figs. But you had to be careful. If caught, you could lose more than your influence. You could lose your tongue, or your entire post. Still, eunuchs were not simply political machines. Some were poets, others were scholars. Many were devout Muslims. They memorized the Quran, led prayers, observed fasts with quiet dedication. In their world of temptation and secrecy, they sought structure, a divine rhythm to counter the chaos of desire swirling around them. But even the pious ones were not immune to scandal. A eunuch was once discovered in correspondence with a European noblewoman. He had been smuggling her letters into the harem using the laundry baskets. Love? Possibly. Leverage? More likely. He vanished from the palace the next day. No trial. No farewell. And what of desire? Did they feel it? Did they miss it? That question lingers like smoke. Some eunuchs had no memory of their former bodies, having been altered as children. Others remembered too well. There are tales, whispered and unconfirmed, of eunuchs who formed quiet bonds with concubines. Nothing physical, but the gaze can be its own kind of intimacy. A gesture, a smile, a kindness. In a place where everything was performance, sincerity became currency. You notice a bowl of fruit on the table. Grapes, figs, a single pear, a gesture of luxury maybe, but also, perhaps, a symbol. Ottoman poets often used fruit to describe longing. A ripe fig represented temptation. A pear, the loneliness of incomplete sweetness. Fun fact, the eunuchs were trained to recognize women not by name or appearance, but by scent. One woman's chamber might smell of rose and sandalwood, another of clove and jasmine. The chief kept notes. If a new perfume was used, it meant someone was preparing to rise, or plotting something dangerous. In some records, these scent profiles were used like dossiers. Smell was surveillance, and in the absence of traditional power, control of the air itself became a weapon. You move toward a small window carved into the stone. Beyond it lies a narrow passage, too tight for grandeur, but just wide enough to hear the soft murmur of women's laughter in the next wing. The eunuchs never saw themselves in those women, but they saw everything about them, their routines, their dreams, their frustrations. Imagine knowing every secret, but sharing none, being the keeper of pleasure, but never its participant. You step back. The chamber darkens. A breeze from the corridor lifts the corner of a prayer mat, and for a moment you feel what they must have felt. In between. Always in between. No power ever comes without a price. And in the Ottoman palace, the most silent men sometimes paid the highest cost. You turn from the quiet gravity of the eunuch's quarters and follow the scent of cardamom into the brighter spaces of the harem. The morning hour here does not follow the sun. It follows the sound of polished cups clicking, whispers bouncing off tile walls, and silk slippers brushing against polished marble. You find yourself in a room filled with cushions, laughter, and thick coffee so strong it could hold a spoon upright. This is no idle gathering. This is the morning conversation circle, the sohbet, where concubines discuss everything from pillow politics to passion strategies with the precision of diplomats. You sit cross-legged beside them, steam from your coffee warming your face. The girl to your left is young, maybe 16, her hair braided with gold thread. She is listening to a much older woman who rolls out a small scroll between sips. The scroll is covered in soft red ink, drawn in graceful loops and swirls. At first, it looks like a pattern for embroidery, but then you realize, these are pleasure maps. Each body is a mystery, they say. These maps claim to solve them. There are no names or explicit shapes, only curves, symbols, and coded metaphors. A tiny tulip marks one point, a silver crescent another. One spot is labeled the garden's gate, another is simply called the cup of night. These are not the fantasies of bored noble women. These are practical documents, passed from generation to generation, adapted, debated, and sometimes redrawn entirely. Historians still argue whether they were imported from Persian manuals, adapted from Greek medicine, or invented in the harem itself. Regardless, they are everywhere, folded into robes, hidden in pillows, whispered between baths. A woman named S3xual gestures to a corner of the parchment. That area, she says, is the path of slow fire. If touched too early, it startles. Too late, it fades. Perfectly timed, it sings. You take another sip of coffee. The bitterness grounds you, but only just. Around you, the women continue their quiet debate. Some say the path is better traced clockwise. Others say the left hand carries more warmth. One woman insists the tips of the fingers must be perfumed with clove oil to awaken the senses. They are not joking. This is serious business. In a palace where survival depends on being seen and remembered, mastering the arts of subtle pleasure is as essential as knowing which fork to use at dinner. Perhaps more so. A fun fact emerges. In the kitchens below, a specific blend of spices was once developed for this purpose. A mix of ground cinnamon, orange peel, black pepper, and dried rose. When brewed into syrup and dabbed behind the ears, it was said to make one's presence linger in the mind like a half-forgotten dream. You glance around the room and realize something else. These women are not just talking about technique, they are talking about power. One of them, older and wrapped in a robe of pale green, leans in and speaks low. She recalls how a single phrase whispered during a quiet moment earned her 3 days of the Sultan's undivided attention. She never repeated it. Some secrets, she says, are meant to be used only once. Nearby, a younger concubine is practicing her gaze in a polished brass plate. She is learning how to look surprised and pleased at the same time. Apparently, this combination is especially disarming. You notice another girl tying knots into her sash, each one a code. 1 knot means I am available. 2 means I am not interested. A slip knot means ask again later. This code is only understood by the eunuchs and the more observant concubines. Communication here is endless, but almost none of it is spoken plainly. Someone unrolls a second scroll. This one is older, the ink faded, the paper fragile. It carries not only diagrams but annotations in different handwriting. Some lines have been struck through, others added with tiny arrows. You are looking at generations of women editing each other's knowledge, a living, breathing body of research written on bodies and for bodies. You laugh softly at one comment in the margin. Never forget the neck, especially behind the left ear. The right one lies. No one knows what that means, but they all nod like it is scripture. One of the women brings out a small tin of sugar-dusted figs. She breaks one open to reveal a tiny slip of paper inside. This is a love note written in lemon ink. It fades after a few hours unless heated. A private message, designed to vanish before a rival could discover it. You hold it carefully as the letters begin to fade. The last visible word is tremble. You place the paper back and look around the room. They are sipping, chatting, stretching, and giggling. On the surface, this is a tea party, but underneath, it is a laboratory, an archive, a classroom with no teacher, yet every woman is a scholar. Historians often reduced harems to mere dens of desire, but here you see the truth. This is not just a place of waiting, it is a place of preparation. These women are not lounging, they are studying, practicing, perfecting, because the Sultan might summon anyone, at any time, and when he does, she must be unforgettable. And if not, she may never be called again. You rise with the others as the scrolls are tucked away. The morning circle ends without fanfare. The knowledge has been shared, the hierarchy reaffirmed, and the coffee has gone cold. One woman turns to you before she leaves. Her voice is low, her eyes unreadable. She says, "What you learn in this room can save you, but it can also destroy you." Then she's gone, leaving only the faint smell of saffron and rosewater behind. You follow the echo of footsteps and the soft patter of bare heels until you reach a larger, steam-filled space. The tiled walls glisten like damp mirrors, and the air carries a comforting weight. This is the hammam, the bathhouse of the palace. But unlike the public ones scattered across Istanbul, this one hums with a different energy. Behind every column, under every arch, something quietly unfolds. The hammam was not only for hygiene, it was theatre, confession, seduction, and strategy. Every layer of clothing removed in here removed something else too: inhibition, rank, caution. The concubines bathe not in isolation but in choreography. No splashing, no laughter too loud. Everything is measured. You step carefully onto the heated marble slab in the center. The Göbek taşı is warm beneath your feet. That's the navel stone, the heart of the bathhouse, where women lie side by side, skin glistening, minds wandering. Above you, steam swirls against stained glass domes, sending shards of colored light dancing across their bodies. A concubine exhales, her breath visible, curling upward as if escaping the building itself. Another woman massages oil into her arms with deliberate slowness, her gaze fixed on her reflection in the water. But this is not just relaxation, this is rehearsal. In here, women whisper about last night, about who was summoned, about what music was played in the Sultan's chamber. The bathhouse is the harem's newsstand. Gossip travels faster through steam than through corridors. Today, the conversation turns to a newcomer. A girl from Georgia, recently arrived and already admired for her singing voice. Someone claims she caught the eye of a eunuch, and that he has been passing notes between her and someone she should not be speaking to. A visiting astrologer, maybe. Or worse, a foreign envoy. You step aside as two women pour bowls of cool water over one another's shoulders. The water runs in rivulets down their spines and pools onto the marble. They move with practiced elegance, as if even rinsing off sweat must be done with style. A midwife arrives, carrying a pouch of herbs and a long-handled silver spoon. She is old, sharp-eyed, and unamused by flirtations. She performs inspections here, virginity checks, discreet treatments, fertility rituals. These too are part of life in the harem. One particularly odd detail stands out. The women sometimes use a paste made from crushed almonds, saffron, and honey as a skin treatment believed to enhance charm. Whether it worked or not is still debated, but its scent, nutty and floral, lingers in the stone to this day. You notice one girl has wrapped her long hair around her chest in a cross, a modesty gesture learned in training. Another reclines with her head tilted back, eyes closed, arms folded behind her, mimicking the pose found on ancient Persian erotic miniatures. Art imitating life, life imitating ambition. A fun fact drifts through the air. Among the concubines, a common superstition claimed that if you spilled water accidentally on another woman's foot, she would be summoned before you. This led to increasingly creative footwork near the fountains. In the corner, a woman sharpens her coal stick with the focus of a soldier preparing a blade. Her eyes are already darkened, but she adds another layer. Appearance in the bathhouse may be casual, but never careless. Even relaxation is a kind of display. There is a separate chamber, partially curtained off, where some concubines receive private steam treatments with herbs believed to boost fertility. Sage, rosemary, myrtle. Sometimes a slice of hot bread placed on the lower back. You raise an eyebrow. But again, everything here has its logic, even if borrowed from magic. You overhear a whispered confession. A woman once faked a fainting spell in the bathhouse just to attract attention. It worked. The Sultan asked about her later that evening. She was summoned 2 nights afterward. And just like that, she rose 3 ranks in the harem. Not all stories end so neatly. A girl named Zeliha had once been the most promising of the group. A talented dancer, sharp-witted. She had even been given a ring by the Sultan during one winter feast. But one day, she insulted the favorite concubine with a joke that went too far. That very week, in this very hammam, she found her slippers missing. She returned to her room and found her belongings rearranged. Then, silence. She was sent to a distant palace under the pretense of illness. No one ever saw her again. Reputation in the harem was like perfume. Strong one moment, faded the next. You take a seat near the wall and watch the ritual unfold. Hair being brushed with bone combs, nails trimmed with tiny golden scissors, steam rising from towels like ghosts. It is easy to forget where you are. Time melts in here. Identity too. But just when things feel peaceful, something shifts. A door opens. Not wide, but enough to signal. A eunuch's voice calls softly. The name is short, only one syllable, but everyone hears it. The girl stands. The water still drips from her arms, but she dries nothing. She simply wraps her cloth tighter and walks silently through the steam. No farewell, no smile, just a straight back and steady breath. She has been chosen, and just like that, the bathhouse returns to stillness. The water flows. The whispers resume. But every woman now replays what she has learned today. A gesture, a scent, a mistake to avoid, or a strategy to try. No one admits it. But each of them hopes that the next name called will be theirs. And you? You sit with your coffee now cold. The steam fades. The marble cools beneath you. The performance is over, but the show has only just begun. You leave behind the steam and secrets of the hammam, only to find yourself drawn into an altogether colder place. Not in temperature, but in tone. The air here feels still, dry, almost brittle. You are standing at the threshold of a room where rituals of another kind take place. No scented oils, no warm tiles, just polished floors, precise instruments, and a lingering sense of inspection. This is the chamber of the midwives and matrons, the gatekeepers of purity, reputation, and reproductive value. You have heard of the famous Ottoman virginity checks. Tonight, you witness them not in scandal, but in structure, cold, deliberate, ceremonial. A young girl enters, guided by two attendants. She wears a simple robe, and her hands are clasped tightly in front of her. Her expression is unreadable. Fear? Maybe, but also something more complex. Ambition, shame, uncertainty. This moment might determine the rest of her life. A senior midwife, with silver in her braid and steel in her gaze, begins the process. No ceremony, no smile, just a swift nod, and the girl is seated. It is quiet, except for the scratch of a quill in the corner as a eunuch takes notes not about the procedure itself, but about the timing, the location, the people present, because records are everything in this world. Historians still argue whether these inspections were always physical, or if sometimes they were symbolic. In some cases, it seems the mere rumor of a girl's virtue was enough to protect or condemn her. In others, the examination was carried out with disturbing frequency, often before and after her time with the Sultan. But here is where things get strange. If a favored girl failed the inspection, not all was lost. There were methods, tricks, rituals. One such practice involved a tightly folded lemon rind, a clove-studded compress, and a brief application of cold water before presentation. The goal was to simulate the expected signs of untouched innocence. You shake your head. The effort, the pressure, the unrelenting weight of expectation, it all sits heavy in the air. There is a woman in the corner preparing small packets of herbs. She is not a doctor nor a mystic, but she has been here for decades. Her hands move quickly, wrapping each packet in fine muslin. These are modest forms of contraception, although no one would dare call them that aloud. The Ottoman court did not speak of prevention, but it understood the consequences of unpredictability. One mix contains ground myrtle, parsley seeds, and dried mint. Another uses thin shavings of copper boiled in vinegar. Some girls hold them inside tiny wax capsules. Others drink infusions in secret before bed. It is a science built from whispers and trial. A fun fact rises from the folds of a nearby document. In some records, midwives were paid bonuses not only for births, but also for non-births. That is, for managing the reproductive calendar of the harem in a way that suited the Sultan's interests. Timing was everything. Too many pregnancies could dilute succession. Too few, and the dynasty weakened. And so the line between fertility and failure was impossibly thin. You walk slowly past a shelf lined with folded silks. But these are not garments. They are ceremonial cloths used during first encounters with the Sultan. Afterward, they are collected, examined, and stored, sometimes burned, sometimes archived. The stain left behind could become either a badge of honor or a mark of shame. It depended on who was watching. Some cloths were even embroidered with the girl's name and the date of her first night. as if it were a holiday or a contract. You try not to stare at one particular item behind glass. A pillow embroidered with a red tulip and the name Layla beneath it. No surname, no rank, just the flower and the memory. No one knows what happened to her. The pillow is all that remains. Near the door, a concubine receives instructions on ceremonial preparation. She is taught how to enter the Sultan's chamber with her eyes lowered, how to sit, when to speak, how to breathe. There is even guidance on how long to pause before smiling. All of it practiced, polished, internalized. This lesson includes candle training. Yes, candle training. She is given a slender beeswax taper and told to walk across the room without letting the flame flicker. Why? Because control is seductive. Grace, under pressure, is remembered. If you can glide through fire, you can survive the harem. But not all girls can. You recall the tale of Melek, a concubine who arrived from Bosnia with a reputation for intelligence and wit. She impressed everyone until her first night with the Sultan ended in silence. No reaction, no invitation to return, no reason given. Her error? No one knew. Perhaps it was her timing, her scent, a wrong word whispered too soon. She was reassigned within the month. There are so many ways to fail here, and only one way to win. You listen to the midwife speak quietly to a nervous girl. Her voice is soft now, almost maternal. She says, "Do not be perfect, be unforgettable." A small truth in a world where perfection means very little if it leaves no mark. You prepare to leave this chamber of caution, its routines etched into the floor like grooves worn from years of pacing. The midwives return to their herbs. The matrons fold the cloths. And somewhere in a different wing, a candle still burns. The girl who passed the inspection today will sleep with rosewater beneath her pillow, and she will dream either of glory or of escape. You step out from the rigid quiet of the inspection room into a space that hums with life again. Music, perfume, a touch of laughter. The air is brighter here, flavored with orange blossom and cinnamon. You've entered the garden pavilion, and the concubines are preparing gifts. Not for the Sultan directly, but for his appetite. Not his hunger exactly, his mood, his senses. In this world, seduction doesn't begin with a kiss. It starts with a fruit, a bowl of figs, halved and brushed with rose syrup, a tray of peeled grapes, chilled and arranged in circles, pomegranates cut like flowers, apricots soaked in honey and saffron. Everything here is a signal. Everything edible is also erotic, if you know how to present it. You watch a woman polish a pear with the corner of her sash, then scent it with a whisper of musk. She will leave it on a tray in the Sultan's chamber, just within reach, just out of necessity. If he touches it first, it means he noticed. If he eats it all, she will be summoned the next night. If he ignores it, she'll change her tactic. These games are subtle but deadly serious. Historians still argue whether these coded offerings were truly part of a structured language or simply personal traditions invented by ambitious concubines. But evidence suggests the system was more organized than outsiders imagined. Even the eunuchs kept mental tallies of which fruits had success, which spices prompted affection, and which scents caused sudden jealousy. Take melons, for example, not just cooling refreshers. In Ottoman poetry, melons were metaphors for soft breasts and patience. A concubine who presented them sliced too early risked being seen as impatient. Too late, and they were overripe. Timing, as always, was everything. Then there is the matter of scents. You move closer to a small tray of perfumed oils being stirred by hand. These are not the luxury perfumes sold in market stalls. These are crafted mixtures, part alchemy, part emotion. One concubine blends jasmine with crushed almond to suggest softness. Another mixes clove and sandalwood to evoke strength. But here is where things get interesting. The favored scent of one of the most powerful women in the harem Sultan, was allegedly infused with frankincense and dried orange peel. Together, they created a scent said to linger in a room even after the curtains had been changed. It became her calling card, her invisible crown. Fun fact, There was a whole profession within the palace dedicated to crafting scent sachets. Women known as koku yapanla, literally scent makers, passed through the harem with tiny boxes filled with powders and resin. They would listen to each woman describe her mood, her desire, or her goal, then blend a custom scent on the spot. Some of these were worn in hair. Others were burned slowly in copper dishes beneath the bed. You lean against a column as a woman arranges fruits on a golden plate. She places cherries in a perfect ring, then balances a fig in the center. It looks accidental. It is anything but. The symmetry draws the eye. The eye leads to curiosity. Curiosity is the gateway to desire. She finishes the display and pauses to admire her work. Then she presses one cherry between her fingers and watches the juice trail down her wrist. She wipes it away with a smile that says, "Yes, I know what I am doing." In this pavilion, food and body are blurred. A sliced peach is more than a snack. It is a suggestion, a preparation, a strategy. Another concubine passes you with a basket of lemons. Not to eat, to write with. Lemon ink is invisible when dry, but when warmed by flame or breath, it reveals what was hidden. The women use it to write notes to one another, and occasionally to him. These messages are slipped into pillow seams, wrapped in fabric, or left under trays. One note, discovered years later, simply read, "Look again." No one knows who wrote it or what it meant. You see now how these women mastered silence. They did not need to speak loudly. A smell, a bite, a letter that disappears. That was enough. At a low table nearby, two older concubines debate the merits of various teas. One claims cardamom tea makes the Sultan stay awake longer, more attentive, more playful. The other prefers anise, saying it softens his mood. A third arrives, offering her mixture of dried rose petals and crushed pistachio. She claims it once made him weep. Perhaps she was joking, perhaps not. And just as you think the performance is over, you notice one last preparation. A bowl of peeled almonds is being polished with edible gold. Each one is wrapped in a thin petal of rose jelly and arranged into a tiny pyramid. It will be placed in the Sultan's chamber just before sundown. The woman who made it will wait 2 nights. If it remains untouched, she will try a different gift. Maybe a poem stitched into a handkerchief, or a song performed behind a screen. This is not desperation, this is design. You hear a eunuch's footsteps. A tray is lifted. A door opens, then closes. The offering is en route, its meaning already set in motion. You exhale. A single grape rolls from the table and lands at your feet. You pick it up and wonder, absurdly, what message it would send if you ate it. The women return to their cushions. Another fruit is chosen. Another story begins. And somewhere in the palace, a man sits in silence, about to take a bite that might change someone's future. You move through the outer courtyards and into a lantern-lit hallway pulsing with rhythmic sounds. Laughter, bells, the sharp snap of fingers. The space is neither bedroom nor ballroom, but something in between. You have entered the practice chamber of the telly girls, the glittering dancers of the imperial court. They do not dance for gold. They dance for access, visibility, position. You watch them now, a circle of young women, hair braided with metallic threads that flash like lightning with every step. Telly, meaning threaded, refers to the strands of silver and gold sewn into their garments. When they move, they shimmer like fireflies caught in silk. A soft drumbeat begins. The lead dancer, her name might be, Aylin, raises her hands with a grace that makes you forget everything else. She spins slowly, hips swaying, eyes half-lidded. But this is not seduction for pleasure. This is seduction as language. Every movement says something, and nothing is said by accident. Her gestures are coded. A hand to the throat can mean longing. A roll of the shoulder signals invitation. A glance to the floor implies shyness. And when she pauses mid-spin to raise one foot in the air, her shadow touches the wall in a crescent. That moment, brief as a blink, is what the eunuchs call a decision flash. the moment when the Sultan or anyone watching decides whether to remember her. Historians still argue whether these dancers were ever part of the Sultan's personal harem or simply performers, but stories persist of a single dance changing a woman's rank overnight. One girl from the provinces danced with a silk scarf woven through her fingers. At the end, she let it fall at the Sultan's feet. He bent to pick it up. She rose 5 ranks by morning. You hear the drums pick up. Another dancer enters. This one is more theatrical. Her style is angular, bold. She stomps with force. Her bells are louder. Someone whispers that she has Balkan blood, known for passion and pride. Her goal is not elegance, but control. She commands the room. The others pause to watch her, and this too is a tactic. You glance toward the edge of the chamber where a group of seated concubines sip syrup from silver cups. They are not dancing tonight. They are observing, learning, choosing what to adopt and what to discard. A girl next to you hums quietly. It is the melody of a famous court song one banned briefly after it caused 3 concubines to faint in the Sultan's presence. Whether from passion or from plot remains unknown. Here comes something unexpected. A prop, a wooden tray, balanced on the dancer's head, holds a single candle. The flame sways as she moves, but never goes out. The room watches breathlessly. This is not a trick. This is precision. You feel your own breath catch, even though you are not the one performing. Fun fact: some dancers trained in secret with mirrors behind curtains to perfect their angles. They learned to move not for themselves, but for the reflection they left behind. Because sometimes the Sultan saw them only through gauze, through curtains, through smoke. You had to be memorable at every distance. A servant brings in trays of dried apricots and mint water. No one eats much. They are too focused. The dancing ends, and the women circle to cool down, gently brushing their skin with rosewater cloths. They do not speak of scores or applause. The reward, if any, comes later. You notice one girl quietly tying bells back onto her ankles. They are worn, faded. She has danced many nights. Yet tonight, she was not chosen to perform. Her eyes do not show envy, only calculation. She will wait. She has a new step planned. Next time, another dancer slips away behind a curtain trailing a scarf. A eunuch follows a few paces behind. There are rumors that some dances are private, not always for the Sultan, sometimes for visitors, sometimes for negotiation, and sometimes simply because someone needed to be remembered by someone who had forgotten them. In the corner of the chamber stands a small wooden box. Inside, you find a collection of worn slippers, all slightly different. Some embroidered with pearls, others with faded thread. These belong to dancers who have either left or disappeared. It is custom to leave one shoe behind, a symbol that you once danced here. You wonder how many of these women ever wanted to dance, how many were trained from childhood, and how many learned quickly to survive. Because in the harem, movement is not only beauty, it is strategy. And sometimes, strategy looks like a twirl, followed by silence. One dancer, chest still rising and falling with exertion, sits beside you. Her voice is soft. They say the Sultan once dreamed of a woman who danced with no music. When he saw her in waking life, he married her. You look at her. Did that happen? She shrugs. Only if he still dreams of her. Behind her, the drum is tapped once more. Not a performance, just a signal. The hour is late. The air is heavy. The dancers retreat. The silk settles. The bells go quiet. And somewhere in the distance, the Sultan is either sleeping or listening. You drift away from the echo of bells and settle into a quieter corner of the palace. A room with low windows, linen curtains, and cushions arranged like petals. It smells of lemon and lavender, and the only sound is the scratching of a reed pen on parchment. This is the message room, not official correspondence, but the silent language of longing. Love notes in the Ottoman harem were rarely written with ink and paper. That was far too easy to intercept. Instead, they were sewn, pressed, perfumed, and hidden. Tonight, You witness the creation of one. A young concubine, perhaps 17, kneels before a small writing table. She holds a handkerchief stitched from muslin, its corner marked with 3 blue knots. In her hand is a quill soaked in lemon juice. Not for decoration, for secrecy. Lemon ink dries invisible. Only heat will reveal the message. Some girls use the warmth of their breath. Others press the cloth to the skin to make the words rise like ghosts. The note she writes is short, poetic, and absurdly dangerous. It reads, "I walked past your shadow and left part of myself behind." She folds the cloth 3 times and places a dried violet in the final crease. The meaning is clear to anyone who understands. I miss you. I am waiting. I cannot say your name. Historians still argue how widespread this practice was, or whether only a few bold women dared to write such messages. Some believe they were part of structured romantic rituals. Others think they were spontaneous. The truth, as always, lies between. You watch as the girl presses the cloth into a bundle of linen being prepared for laundry. The bundle will pass through eunuch hands. If no one is watching, it will arrive in the recipient's quarters. If someone intercepts it, she might lose more than her chance at love. Risk is a constant flavor in these rooms. You turn toward the wall, where other notes are being crafted in different forms. One is embroidered with thread. Another is written with pomegranate juice. Still another is a series of tiny shell beads, sewn into a pattern along the edge of a sash. These are not decorations. These are letters. Each color, each bead, each stitch means something. There is a quiet genius here, a system of soft resistance. The women in the harem may not speak freely, but they speak constantly. Every object around them is a potential sentence. Every fold a paragraph. Every scent a punctuation mark. You move closer to a girl arranging flowers on a tray. She plucks a tulip and places it beside a sprig of basil. Tulip for affection, basil for regret. A poem with no paper. Fun fact: in the Ottoman court, the language of flowers was considered a legitimate form of communication. It even had its own name, salam. Eunuchs sometimes acted as translators, passing along floral messages and explaining their meanings. One such eunuch famously misread a bouquet, leading to an unintended scandal and a week of icy silence between the Sultan and his favorite concubine. You try not to smile. Even royal passion is fragile. Another girl nearby places a sliver of cloth inside a hollow bead and strings it onto a necklace. This bead holds a message too, one written on the cloth in saffron. It is meant to fade after a few days. The necklace will be worn once, then taken apart. The message, once read, will disappear. That is the point. You realize now that the harem is not just a space of bodies. It is a world of voices, all speaking in parallel, beneath the surface. Some in fruit, some in flowers, some in thread, but all carrying weight. One eunuch enters briefly to collect laundry. He gives a subtle nod to the girl by the window. She does not nod back, but her fingers twitch twice. A signal. A message acknowledged. No words. In the corner of the room stands a large mirror, unusual for this palace. Most mirrors are small, portable. This one is fixed, tall, and cracked across one side. No one uses it for grooming. It is not for beauty. It is for watching behind. Some concubines practice approaching it with messages folded in their sleeves, watching to see if anyone follows them from behind. You sit for a moment and imagine what it must feel like to craft a message that could change your fate. A note that might summon someone, or warn them, or simply remind them they are not forgotten. One letter reportedly written in lemon ink was discovered decades later, pressed between the pages of a prayer book. It read simply, "Forgive me, I could not wait." Another, found stitched into the hem of a robe, read, "If you drink the tea tonight, I will know." And one final example, now lost except for rumor. A note made of crushed rose petals pressed into a paste and painted along the edge of a comb. The words were not meant to be read. They were meant to be inhaled. That was all. You glance back at the girl who started it all, still seated with the lemon ink. She lifts the cloth to her lips, warming it with her breath. A few letters flicker, then fade. Satisfied, she folds it tightly and hides it beneath her sash. She will not deliver it herself. She will not watch it travel. She may never even know if it was read. But still, she writes, because here in the harem, love is not always a meeting. Sometimes it is simply the hope that someone, somewhere, is holding something you touched. The scent of cloves drifts in through a corridor you hadn't noticed before. It's darker here, quieter, and the walls begin to close in. You follow the curve of the passage until it opens into a hidden chamber. Dim candlelight flickers across polished wood and thick velvet curtains. This is not a common room, not one meant for public eyes. It's a secret space reserved for the harem's more experimental forms of pleasure and control. Tonight, you've stepped into the chamber of silken rope and shadow games. There is no music, only breath. The air feels charged, like something has already happened, or is just about to. You pause, eyes adjusting, and begin to notice details. A wooden trunk lined with crimson velvet. Inside, cords, scarves, sashes, some finely embroidered, others plain. All soft to the touch, yet tied into knots that suggest purposes beyond decoration. A concubine stands in the corner, adjusting a loop of silk around her wrist. Not tight, not painful, decorative, but deliberate. Her expression is neutral, almost meditative. She's not alone. Another girl assists her, helping wrap the cord across her chest in a crisscross pattern. There is no urgency, no shame. This is practice, preparation. You may be tempted to call this bondage, but in the harem, it was more than restraint. It was performance, symbolism, and in many cases, training in trust. A concubine who could submit gracefully or playfully resist at just the right moment was often remembered longer than one who simply obeyed. Historians still argue whether this practice was formalized or entirely improvised. Some believe certain knots held symbolic meaning: protection, surrender, promise. Others suggest it was entirely based on mood and invention. What is certain is that many of these techniques mirror rituals found in Persian, Indian, and even Chinese love traditions. There's a scroll on a nearby table, unrolled halfway. It's not text, but illustration ink drawings of lovers entwined in carefully arranged poses. Some show one partner wrapped in silken cords, the other lifting their chin with a single finger. These are not crude. They are elegant, precise, anatomical. One pose is called the sleeping vine, another, the swan's tether. The scroll is unsigned. Some say it was commissioned by a bored sultan. Others think it was drawn by one of the concubines herself, a woman who taught rope play as a private art. Her name appears nowhere in the palace records, but her designs survived. You glance toward a curtain that sways gently despite the lack of breeze. Behind it, you sense movement, perhaps more training, perhaps an actual encounter. The point is not to interrupt. A fun fact: the cords used in these rituals were often scented. Before use, they would be rubbed with oil, jasmine, clove, or bitter orange. The scent served two purposes. 1. To mark the body with memory. 2. To disguise the fact that the same cords were used again and again. Scent, in this case, erased the past. In the corner sits a basket filled with soft wooden sticks. You ask what they're for. A nearby attendant explains they were used in a variation of shadow play, each stick wrapped in fabric, tied to elbows or knees to exaggerate movement. In low light, the result was hypnotic, a form of visual poetry, with no words spoken. There are stories of one concubine who performed such a routine while completely motionless. Her cords tightened, her eyes fixed on a candle. Her stillness was the performance. The Sultan watched in silence, then turned and whispered a command to the chief eunuch. She was made his favorite by the next day. It wasn't the act, it was the tension. Back in the room, two girls begin a mock routine. One kneels, hands in front, wrists crossed. The other begins to tie a loop gently around them. There is no restraint, not really. The rope slips easily with one pull, but the act is about control, giving it, taking it, holding it in mid-air. You observe as the girl doing the tying pauses and whispers something into the other's ear. A smile, a slow exhale. Then they reverse positions. Roles here are fluid. They depend on mood, hierarchy, even horoscope. And yes, astrology plays a role here too. A chart pinned discreetly to the wall suggests the best times for symbolic surrender based on the moon's position. It advises against such rituals during a waning moon, when bonds might loosen too quickly. One line reads, Venus in Leo favor passion tied with pride. Another, Mars in Pisces unfasten, let softness lead. Whether the girls believed in these stars or simply used them as decoration is unknown. But the timing of their rituals was never left to chance. You kneel briefly near a tray of small brass bells. Each has a different tone. These were sometimes tied to the cords not to make noise, but to mark movement. The quieter the bells, the more refined the performance. One story claims that a concubine tied a bell to her ankle during a private visit. It did not ring once during the entire evening. The Sultan mentioned this to no one. But days later, she received a gift, a robe stitched with tiny bells in gold thread. She had pleased him without needing to be heard. You look around the room again. It is quiet now. The women are resting, the ropes coiled neatly, the candles nearly burned down. In the silence, you realize something important. In the Ottoman harem, restraint was not just physical, it was emotional, social, ceremonial. These cords, soft as breath, symbolized a deeper discipline. To bind is not always to trap, and to be still is not always to lose power. The corridor narrows once more, leading you deeper into the palace's private veins. This time, the air hums with incense and the faint chime of hanging crystals. You are stepping into a space devoted not to performance, not to punishment, but to prediction. A room where time bends and pleasure waits for permission. You are entering the astrologer's chamber. The Ottoman Empire was no stranger to celestial influence. Every grand decision from battles to births was once aligned with the stars. And in the Sultan's private life, those stars held even more intimate responsibilities. The timing of desire, the rhythm of romance. The very moment a concubine was called, these were not left to whim. They were charted. A eunuch nods to you as he passes a velvet curtain. Behind it, a man in robes covered with constellations leans over a table littered with maps, candles, and small glass spheres. His name might be forgotten or changed many times, but his role is precise. Court astrologer. Tonight, he is consulting Venus. You lean over the table, careful not to knock over the astrolabe. A chart is spread before you, inked in sharp lines and golden curves. The astrologer points to a particular conjunction, Venus and the moon in Pisces. He murmurs that this is a time for deep emotion, but also for illusion. Not every desire acted upon under this influence will lead to happiness. You blink. He says the Sultan should avoid any new lovers tonight. Too much softness, too much risk. Better to reflect than indulge. Yes, this is what they do here. Not just stargazing, but calendar making for passion. Historians still argue whether this level of astrological consultation was truly obeyed, or if it merely gave the Sultan a polite excuse to delay or accelerate his interest. Some say the astrologers held real sway. Others believe they were theatrical advisors with convenient answers. Either way, their predictions shaped lives. On the shelves are scrolls marked with the names of past concubines and the dates they were summoned. These logs show clear patterns. Some women were only invited during full moons, others only during Mercury's ascension. Some names reappear precisely every 6 weeks, timed to cycles both physical and planetary. You hear a bell ring once. A concubine enters, head bowed, a small copper bowl in her hands. It holds water, rose petals, and a single floating stone. She places it on the table without a word. The astrologer waves his hand over the bowl and watches how the petals move. He claims the water is sensitive to the current alignment of Mars. The motion suggests agitation, a sign to avoid conflict tonight. You wonder how many women hoped their name would be chosen. only to be postponed by a wave of flower petals. Fun fact: in certain Ottoman manuscripts, there are records of orgasm horoscopes. These were personalized charts that determined the ideal time of day and even physical direction, north-facing or south-facing, for achieving the highest satisfaction. Were these taken seriously? Hard to say, but they were copied carefully and bound in silk. One concubine, known for her poetic sensibility, reportedly refused to attend the Sultan unless her personal astrologer confirmed the stars were favorable. She claimed she wanted her body to be in harmony with the sky. Eventually, the Sultan gave up trying to summon her randomly. He began requesting her only on nights when her charts allowed. Her legend lasted longer than her life. In the corner of the room, a strange device ticks softly. It is a rotating globe with tiny silver moons and brass rings. You realize it's a mechanical calendar that tracks eclipses, lunar cycles, and other celestial events tied to the Sultan's intimate routines. Someone lights a bundle of herbs, sandalwood and mint, used to cleanse the space before any sensual encounter. The smoke curls in shapes that seem to mimic the chart on the table. Or maybe you're imagining it. In this room, it's hard to tell what's real. The astrologer speaks again, this time quoting an older scroll. He says, "No touch given under a waning moon will last beyond the morning." A warning, or a comfort. There are debates on which signs are most compatible for romantic union. Leo and Aries for passion, Pisces and Cancer for depth, Scorpio with Scorpio, only if you want to start a fire you can't put out. The women of the harem sometimes request their own charts, though rarely allowed full access. More often, they observe. They count moon phases, memorize when others are called, and build their own informal predictions. There's power in pattern. Even if you can't control the stars, you can learn their schedule. One girl, it is said, predicted her own rise by watching the movement of the cypress trees outside her window. She noticed that when they swayed to the east, and the air smelled of cardamom, the Sultan always chose someone with dark hair. On such a night, she dyed her hair with walnut ink. She was called the next day. Coincidence? The eunuchs didn't think so. They began checking wind patterns after that. You peer again at the chart on the table. The astrologer adds a new note beside today's date. Evening open for renewal. It is vague, but hopeful. Someone, somewhere in the harem will be chosen tonight. Perhaps not for passion, but for reconnection. A former favorite. A lover forgotten. A thread picked back up after months of silence. The astrologer closes his scroll, presses a seal onto soft wax, and hands the note to a eunuch. It will be delivered to the Sultan's chamber before sundown. No one questions it, because in this palace, the stars do not predict desire. They schedule it. You follow the fading scent of burning herbs down a narrower path, your fingers grazing the cool tiles that line the wall. The starlight no longer reaches you here, but the smell of something earthy, pungent, and almost intoxicating pulls you forward. The hallway opens suddenly into a chamber glowing with lamplight and cluttered with small dishes, mortars, and tiny corked vials. This is the harem's apothecary, but it's not for medicine. It's for arousal. Here, the concubines come not for healing, but for enhancement. Bottles labelled with delicate script line the shelves. Rose resin, clove dust, powdered ambergris, crushed saffron, civet paste. Each one designed not to cure, but to stir, to awaken, to provoke. You watch as a woman grinds 2 dried figs with honey and cardamom. She adds a whisper of pepper and places the mixture into a porcelain dish shaped like a tulip. This is not a snack. This is a prelude. The blend is said to warm the body and intensify sensation. Whether it works, of course, depends entirely on who believes it will. Historians still argue how much faith the women placed in these preparations. Some viewed them as charms, others saw them as chemistry, but few dismissed them entirely. In a palace where desire was currency, no advantage was too small. Another woman hands you a jar with a greenish paste inside. It smells faintly of mint and vinegar. She tells you it is meant to be applied to the inner wrists, behind the knees, and along the neck. It creates a tingling sensation that mimics nervous excitement. She winks and says, "The body doesn't always know the difference between real and suggested heat." On a low table lies an opened scroll. It is a recipe list written in old script, possibly copied from a Persian original. Ingredients include ground pearls, deer musk, powdered rhubarb, and cinnamon bark. Some recipes are for ingestion, others for rubbing into the skin. A few are stranger. One involves wearing a ring soaked in rosewater overnight, then placing it in the lover's mouth before dawn. Whether anyone still does this remains unknown. Fun fact: the use of ambergris, yes, the waxy substance produced in the intestines of sperm whales, was common in the Ottoman harem as a base for many arousal oils. When mixed with jasmine or rose, it created a scent that lingered for days. So effective was its staying power that one sultan reportedly banned it during court sessions, claiming it clouded his judgment. You examine a small bowl filled with crushed clove buds. Beside it, a thin silver spoon rests on a silk napkin. Clove, when brewed in tea or added to sweets, was believed to increase desire and clarity at once. One concubine, famous for her calm demeanor, was said to chew a single clove before each audience with the Sultan. He once asked why she always smelled of winter. She replied, "Because I want you to remember me when it's cold." The apothecary has no formal keeper. Instead, the knowledge is passed quietly from woman to woman, a secret network of recipes, observations, and whispered results. One girl claims that powdered pomegranate peel makes the lips look more flushed. Another swears that rubbing fresh basil on the soles of the feet keeps nerves away. One corner of the room holds a set of flasks, labeled only by color: red, green, gold. These are custom blends, made not for scent but for body temperature. The gold one, when applied, reportedly causes a soft warming sensation across the chest. The red one is stronger. Applied to the inner thighs, it creates a flush, a blush in liquid form. Some of these effects are psychological, of course, but in the harem, psychology was part of the job. You see a girl preparing something thicker, a paste made of ground dates, black sesame and cinnamon, kneaded until it resembles soft clay. This one, she explains, is taken before sleep. It's not meant to arouse but to prepare the mind. Dreams are considered important here. Some believe what happens in dreams can influence real attraction, that a vivid dream, carefully timed, can shape a sultan's subconscious. Indeed, dreams were tracked as carefully as real encounters. Some concubines kept silent journals hidden inside their pillows. In one fragment discovered centuries later, a woman wrote, "He touched only my hand in the dream, but when he looked at me in the courtyard today, I saw he remembered." You feel the weight of it now. Every oil, every powder, every faint shimmer applied to the collarbone. It's not only to attract, it's to create memory, impression, a trace. Because in the vast swirl of the harem, being noticed once is not enough. You need to be felt twice, once in the room, and once again after it's empty. You notice a long strip of silk laid out on a bench. Small pouches are stitched into it, each one holding a scent-soaked pebble. When the sash is worn around the waist, the pebbles warm with the body and release their fragrance slowly, creating a subtle trail. One girl tells you it's how she won her second invitation, not with her words, with the air she left behind. Another concubine passes behind you carrying a glass jar filled with pale yellow powder. She whispers that it's made of dried marjoram, lemon rind, and the skin of a single fig. She calls it first touch. No one knows exactly what it's supposed to do, but everyone seems to want it. As you prepare to leave, a girl places something into your hand, a small sachet, wrapped in silk and tied with hair. Inside, she says, is a secret blend that only works if you never tell anyone you have it. You smile. You do not ask what's in it. In the harem, some knowledge is shared, and some is worn like perfume, known only to the one who dares to use it. The apothecary fades behind you, but the air still clings to your clothes, sweet, earthy, faintly musky. You blink away the haze as you follow a quiet staircase that descends not into darkness, but into ambiguity. The lines of gender in this part of the palace are blurred, bent, and sometimes erased altogether. You are entering a part of the harem rarely spoken about, yet always present. This is the corridor of shifting selves where clothing, identity, and desire swirl together. You hear the swish of fabric before you see her or him. The figure who steps into view wears a robe that could belong to either. Their face is painted delicately, lips red, kohl around the eyes, hair oiled and pinned. But it's not just a costume. It's a performance of self, a truth wrapped in choice. The harem, rigid in hierarchy, was fluid in other ways. Men dressed as women dressed as men. Some did it to entertain, some to survive, others to express what they could not name in daylight. And the palace, in its contradiction, allowed it so long as it stayed within shadow. You settle beside a quiet gathering of performers preparing for a private play. One adjusts his sash, careful to hide his chest, while another dabs perfume onto her wrists and folds a feather into her headscarf. It is a dress rehearsal, but not just for theatre. Tonight, the performance is about a prince and his secret double, a twin who lives in the palace as a woman. The story is fictional, or perhaps it's not. The line between plot and history is so thin here that even the eunuchs no longer correct it. Historians still argue whether cross-dressing in the Ottoman court was merely entertainment or something deeper. Some records suggest it was ritualized, others treat it as scandalous exception. What's certain is that the practice existed, and often, those who embraced it rose faster than those who resisted it. There is a famous story of a woman named Semele, born to a merchant family and brought to the palace for her beauty. She cut her hair short, wrapped her chest, and joined the servant ranks disguised as a boy. For 2 years, no one questioned her. When she was finally discovered, the Sultan was reportedly so intrigued by her deception that he summoned her personally. She later became one of his advisors. Not a consort, not a favorite, an advisor. Her story is passed between the concubines in whispers, each retelling more embellished than the last. Some say she continued wearing men's clothing. Others claim she slipped between roles depending on who was watching. Fun fact: one of the harem's informal traditions during festival nights involved identity masquerades, when concubines swapped roles with eunuchs or dressed as janissaries, ministers, even the Sultan himself. The rule was that nothing spoken that night could be held against you the next morning. You pass a mirror and see a concubine adjusting a fake mustache made of horsehair. She wears a small turban, tilted just so. Her expression is not playful, it's focused. She is becoming someone, not pretending. And when she turns to look at you, her gaze carries the weight of both distance and invitation. Nearby, a eunuch applies blush to a fellow servant's cheeks. The gesture is practiced, familiar. No mocking, no hesitation. He hums as he works, a tune no one else seems to know. You sit down beside a box of clothing. It contains items from every corner of the empire. Embroidered jackets from the Balkans, boots from Anatolia, silk sashes from Persia. These are not only costumes, they are tools. One day, a woman may use a man's coat to escape attention. Another day, a man might wear a veil to deliver a message no one else could carry. Gender, in this space, is not erased. It's rewritten. You listen as an older concubine tells a story from her youth. She had once been in love, she says, not with the Sultan, but with a woman who dressed like a janissary. They never touched, never spoke of it openly. But each night, she tied a green ribbon to her robe, and each morning, the janissary left a slice of quince near her door. That was enough, until one day, the quince stopped coming, and the ribbon was never worn again. There is a kind of dignity in not naming some desires. A younger girl asks, "Was it real love?" The older woman replies, "What else would it be?" You lean back and look up at the vaulted ceiling. Painted stars swirl above you. Perhaps it is accidental. Or perhaps the artist knew that this room was closer to the sky than most. A dancer steps onto a small platform. Tonight, she is playing a prince. She adjusts her posture, drops her voice slightly, and moves with a new kind of gravity. The concubines applaud softly, not because she has tricked them, but because she has convinced them. A eunuch watching nearby nods slowly and says, "Sometimes, pretending is the only way to tell the truth." You realize now that this room, this strange perfumed chamber, is one of the freest spaces in the palace. No power is claimed here, only explored. No roles are fixed. Even time seems to pause. As you prepare to leave, you hear someone whisper a question behind you. Who would you be if no one expected you to be anything? You do not answer. Not yet. In this part of the palace, it's enough just to ask. The air cools again as you move upward, this time toward a chamber, rarely entered by anyone but the most trusted few. The light is dim, the walls panelled in dark wood, the scent in the air a mix of ink, dried petals, and a whisper of tobacco. A single oil lamp burns in the corner, and the sound of turning pages fills the room like a heartbeat. This is the Sultan's private study. Tonight, you do not find him here, but what he left behind. You are staring at what may be the most forbidden text in the entire palace, a personal diary. It is bound in green leather, the corners worn soft by time. On the first page, the Sultan wrote only a date and one word: begin. The handwriting is strong but uneven, as if even he wasn't sure whether he wanted to confess. And yet, he continued, as you turn the pages, the voice becomes clearer. Not the voice of a ruler, but of a man trying to understand his own longings, his doubts, his guilt, his compulsions. One entry describes a moment with a concubine whose name he never mentions. He writes only that her breath smelled of cardamom, and that when she laughed, he felt something like shame, not because of her, but because of how much he wanted her to stay. He writes, "She touched my shoulder, as if she'd known me in another life. I wanted to ask if she had. I did not." Elsewhere, he details his obsession with a woman's hair not for its beauty, but for the way it reminded him of the riverbanks in Edirne, where he once watched reeds bend in the wind. The entry ends with the question, is memory a form of disloyalty? Historians still argue whether this diary is authentic or a later fabrication. Some claim it was written by a poet who wanted to dramatize palace life. Others believe it is real, copied in secret by a literate concubine who had access to the Sultan's private desk. Either way, its contents are strange, intimate, and oddly poetic. You pause on a page that describes a nightmare. The Sultan dreams of being surrounded by women, each one wearing the same face. When he reaches to touch them, their skin turns to paper. They crumble in his hands, leaving only the smell of rose oil and wet ink. He wakes in tears, unable to breathe. And then he writes, "Power has made me lonely, but desire makes me frightened." That line stays with you. Another section is devoted entirely to scent. He ranks the perfumes of his favorites with obsessive detail. He describes one as like warm earth before rain, and another as the space between two pomegranate seeds. One concubine he never calls by name, only by color, the one in indigo. She appears often. He notes the angle of her neck when she reads, the way her fingernail caught on a gold thread. He never says what happened between them, but on one page he writes, "I waited for her laughter again today. It did not come. I summoned no one. It seems she left a silence that no other woman could fill." Fun fact, one page of the diary includes what looks like a recipe for sleep. It lists ground poppy seeds, boiled quince, and warm goat milk. He writes that he drinks it when dreams become too vivid, but then adds, "I fear sleep more than war." A few entries later, he references a night when he asked a concubine not to touch him, not out of disinterest, but out of fatigue. He simply wanted to listen to her breathe. She did not speak. She stayed until morning. That was enough. The diary takes a strange turn near the middle. The tone shifts. The entries become more chaotic, the writing tighter, more frantic. He begins listing names, not of lovers, but of girls he did not choose. He wonders where they are now, whether they hate him, whether they remember his face or only the ceiling. He writes, "There are more women in this palace than I have tears for." The next day's entry is blank. You reach the end of the diary. The final page holds no date, no signature, just a single sentence. "If I had been born a servant, would I have been free?" You close the book gently, hands slightly trembling. This man, who commanded armies and commanded desire, could not command his own heart. He lived surrounded by beauty, yet starved for authenticity. He was adored, feared, obeyed, and yet, often, he was alone. The diary was never meant to be read, but now that you have, you cannot forget it. You step out of the study and back into the corridor, the air colder than before. The pages echo behind you like footsteps. And somewhere in the palace, someone lights a lamp in another room, unaware that they have just become another unnamed entry. The diary's echo clings to you like perfume. You drift through the palace with a strange weight in your chest, unsure if it's grief, awe, or something more complicated. The Sultan's words have peeled back a layer of illusion, and now the harem feels slightly different. Less myth, more blood. You follow the sound of raised voices, not angry but tense. Negotiation, pleading. You have arrived at one of the less glamorous, yet equally strange corners of harem life. The settling of virginity debts. It sounds like a riddle, doesn't it? But here, in the Ottoman court, even purity had a price tag. You stand at the edge of a long chamber where older women governesses, stewards, eunuchs sit in a semicircle facing a young man. He's flushed, agitated, holding a document sealed in red wax. Beside him is an older concubine, serene, immaculately dressed, speaking only when necessary. This is not a trial, but it is a reckoning. The man has accused a former concubine of promising her virginity to his brother before she entered the palace. Now the brother is dead, the promise unfulfilled, and the family wants compensation. Yes, this actually happened. You lean in as the arguments swirl around phrases like broken trust, implied contract, and honor paid in silk. The idea seems absurd from the outside, but within this world, virginity was not just a concept. It was a commodity, and a highly negotiable one. Historians still argue whether these settlements were formalized or rare exceptions. Some believe they were routine, with records kept in code. Others insist they were whispered arrangements, handled through gifts and silence. Tonight, the case is being resolved with grace. The eunuch announces that the concubine will send the family 3 bolts of silk, a saddle horse, and a carved mirror from Damascus. The family representative accepts this, but adds with a touch of bitterness, "And her name will not be praised in our house." To which the concubine replies coolly, "Then your house will remain quiet." No one dares to smirk, but you feel the air shift. Later, you find yourself in a room filled with chests and trunks. This is where many of these settlements are stored or prepared. Not just silk and horses, but gold-threaded robes, jeweled combs, and ornate sugar trays, each one possibly payment for something broken, promised, or forgotten. You run your fingers along a carved chest and notice a date etched into the wood. It matches a case whispered about in old records. A concubine promised to a diplomat's son who died before he could collect. Her virginity had been the dowry. When she joined the Sultan's court instead, his family demanded repayment. They received 3 slaves, 2 rings, and a golden ewer. Fun fact: one recorded settlement involved the hand of another sibling. That's right. When one promise of intimacy fell through, families sometimes requested a replacement marriage to preserve honor. In a famous case, a concubine's younger sister was married off to cover the loss. The original concubine was never consulted. You pause near a small table where notes are being written. These are letters sent to villages or towns, explaining what has been decided. Not in full detail, of course. The wording is elegant, full of metaphor. Phrases like, "the thread was redirected," or "the rose bush was placed in a new garden." but those who receive them understand. A woman nearby is binding a scroll with a ribbon. She sighs and says, "Every promise costs something, even if it was whispered in childhood." You sit beside a younger concubine who looks troubled. She explains her story quietly. Before entering the palace, she had been promised in marriage to a merchant's son. But the Sultan's scouts saw her, and that promise was erased overnight. The boy's family sent a letter, polite but bitter, demanding something in return. She never saw the letter, but she knows that her uncle paid them off in rugs. Rugs. That's what her first kiss cost. And now she prepares for another night of waiting to be chosen. You don't know whether to laugh or weep. Another girl tells you that her dowry was taken from her and paid forward to a cousin in the provinces. She says it felt like her life was being passed around like a parcel. But then she shrugs. "At least I am here." The rug stayed behind. You notice something curious. Not all these settlements are about virginity lost. Some are about virginity avoided. In a few rare cases, concubines who left the palace before being chosen had to prove they were still untouched, so they could be married off as promised. If not, families demanded replacement dowries from the palace. Yes, there was paperwork for this too. Somewhere in a back shelf lies a rolled scroll stating, "She was never summoned," a formal confirmation that the girl was returned intact. The phrase is stamped in wax like a military decree. You step outside for air. The night is cool, but not cold. The sky above Topkapi is soft with stars. In the distance, you hear music from the harem garden, and you realize something deeply unsettling. In a world where desire holds power, even the absence of desire must be accounted for, tracked, priced, balanced like a ledger. You return to the chest room one last time. A woman sits beside a box, holding a folded cloth to her chest. It was meant to be a wedding veil, never worn, never burned. She hums a lullaby with no words. Maybe it's for the promise she once made, or maybe for the version of herself that never arrived. You leave behind the records, the ledgers, and the bitter exchanges, stepping back into a chamber that feels softer but no less strategic. It's quieter here, dimmer. Cushions are arranged in a ring, and the air is filled with the scent of orange blossoms and jasmine. But there's something else in the air too, something theatrical. You have entered the training hall of sound. More specifically, of moaning. Yes, that kind of moaning. The concubines are gathered in loose formation, not for dance, not for song, but for vocal exercises. And before you raise an eyebrow, understand this. In the Ottoman harem, every breath was rehearsed. Every sound mattered. A sigh could be an invitation. A gasp could signal mystery. A moan, well, that was its own kind of weapon. Here they practiced ecstasy the way others practiced calligraphy. An older concubine named Halime stands at the center. Her robe is simple, but her voice is commanding. She instructs the younger women to lie down on their backs and close their eyes. Not to sleep, to feel. She asks them to take slow breaths, to stretch their mouths in silence, then hum at different pitches. The room begins to buzz, like a garden full of invisible bees. Then Halime claps her hands once. "Now," she says, "begin with the breath of anticipation, then the breath of welcome, then the breath of surrender." And yes, they all know what she means. Historians still argue whether these lessons were formal or passed down informally. Some say the palace had actual vocal tutors for erotic training. Others believe senior concubines shared their secrets in moments like this, away from the eyes of eunuchs and advisors. Either way, the practice existed, and it was meticulous. Halime corrects one girl's tone, telling her she sounds too breathy, like a sparrow in winter. She adjusts another's rhythm, comparing her to a drum that cannot find its beat. The metaphors are kind, but firm. No one laughs. This is not a joke. You sit at the edge of the circle, watching as the women try again. This time, it is better. A soft chorus of rising exhalations fills the room, layered with delicate hums and the occasional sharp intake of breath. It is strange, hypnotic. You feel yourself blushing, and yet you also feel admiration. This is not performance for the sake of vanity. This is strategy. In a palace where you might only have one night to capture a sultan's attention, every detail counted. The voice could do what beauty alone could not. It could linger. Fun fact: in certain Ottoman love poems, the female voice is described not in terms of words, but in textures. One poet writes of a woman whose sigh wrapped around his spine like silk. Another describes laughter that fell onto his neck like rosewater. It was never just what she said, it was how she sounded when she said it. Halime pauses the session to explain something practical. Every man listens differently, she says. Some respond to silence, others to breath. One sultan only paid attention when a woman whispered in his left ear. The right one he ignored completely. There's a brief giggle from the circle. Halime allows it, then continues. There was a girl once, she says, who had a terrible singing voice but a beautiful whisper. She learned to speak so closely, so slowly, that he stopped calling the others. For weeks. You look around the room and realize each concubine is discovering her own frequency. Some favor deeper, chestier tones. Others experiment with the high, breathy cadence of longing. One girl laughs unexpectedly mid-exhale. Halime nods. Sometimes joy is the most erotic sound. There's a musical instrument in the corner. A knee, the reed flute. It is said to mimic the breath of the divine. In some sessions, the women practice their vocal tones while the flute plays. It helps them tune their bodies to emotion, to build tension and release. Tonight, the ney is silent, but the women have found their rhythm. A eunuch appears briefly at the doorway, bows, and disappears. This lesson is not his business. You lean in as Halime introduces something new, the silence. She instructs the women to build a crescendo and then stop suddenly, completely. The absence of sound is just as powerful as the presence of it, she says. It leaves room for the imagination to stumble, for the heart to quicken. One girl does it perfectly. Her moan rises, peaks, then cuts off like a string pulled taut. The room holds its breath with her. Even you forget to exhale. Halime smiles. Now that, she says, is a promise without a word. You sit in wonder, thinking about how much has been shaped by sound in this place. Battles declared with drums, victories celebrated with music. And here, in the quiet of the harem, futures decided by breath. A younger concubine sits beside you, wiping her brow. She looks tired but proud. I used to think beauty was everything, she says. Now I know it's the echo that matters. You nod, though you're still recovering from the room's symphony of softness. As the session winds down, Halime instructs them to hum a final tone in unison. It is low, steady, grounding. You feel it in your chest more than in your ears, a sound like the moment before a kiss, or the last sigh after one. Then silence. No clapping, no bowing, just breath returning to normal. One by one, the women rise, stretch, and slip away into the corridors. Their footsteps are light. Their voices, when they speak, are soft but newly sharpened. You sit alone for a while, listening to the silence echoing around you, and you wonder how many nights in this palace were shaped, not by touch, not by sight, but by a single well-timed whisper. The stillness after the moaning lesson lingers in your ears like a fading note. You move slowly through the corridor, past embroidered tapestries and darkened nooks, only to find yourself in a different kind of room, one that smells of dried herbs, worn leather, and something else you can't quite name. It is not perfume, not incense, not body. It is animals. You have entered the chamber of charms and taboos, where superstition runs the show, and nature's creatures are both feared and worshipped. This is not about pets. This is about symbols, furs, feathers, bones, even whispers of something more alive. A concubine sits on a low stool near the window, threading tiny pigeon feathers into her sash. She is not decorating, she is warding. Pigeons, in the Ottoman imagination, were seen as messengers of longing. If you dreamt of one landing on your hand, it meant someone desired you from afar. To wear the feathers was to call them closer. Another woman nearby wraps her hair in a cloth embroidered with the shape of a cat. She tells you, without smiling, that cats absorb jealousy. If a rival wishes ill upon her, the cat will carry the weight instead. You sit carefully near a table where strange objects are arranged like offerings. Dried lizards, snake skins, the wings of moths, and bundles of fur. They are not used for harm, at least, not directly. They are believed to draw, deflect, or dissolve emotions. One of the more unsettling items is a sealed pouch of crocodile dung. It's dry now, powdered, and carefully wrapped in cloth. The woman handling it explains that when placed under a bed, it was thought to control fertility. Some say it prevented conception. Others believed it helped select the gender of a child. Historians still argue whether this practice originated from ancient Egyptian contraceptive rituals or whether it developed independently within the empire. Either way, it was real. And oddly, it wasn't secret. These women would speak freely about such things in private, even if never allowed in the Sultan's presence. You watch as one girl lights a thread of goat hair wrapped with rosemary and cloves. The smoke rises in tight spirals. She circles it over her own body, then waves it near another concubine who seems to have a headache. The ritual is meant to clear heavy air, not just smells, but emotions. Bad luck, rivalry. She calls it smoke for forgetfulness. A fun fact: some concubines believed snake skin, when sewn into the hem of a robe, would make the wearer more mysterious. Not more beautiful, more mysterious. As if the texture of the animal transferred to the attitude of the person. You run your hand over a velvet pouch filled with pebbles. It rattles gently. Inside a tiny teeth fox, rabbit, mouse. Each one has a different use. A fox tooth, rubbed between the palms, is said to increase cunning. A rabbit tooth in the mouth, before speaking to the Sultan, might soften your words. There's even a myth about a woman who tied 2 bird hearts together with golden thread and placed them beneath her pillow. She was summoned by the Sultan within the week and remained his favorite for an entire season. Whether it was the hearts, or her perfume, or coincidence, no one could say. But no one forgot it either. In the corner sits a bowl of milk. Nothing else. When asked, the concubine in charge shrugs. It's for the spirits, she says. If you forget to leave something sweet, they might leave something bitter. She does not elaborate. You glance upward and notice a netted bag hanging from the ceiling. Inside is a withered piece of leather shaped vaguely like a bat's wing. The concubines call it the guardian wing. It is never touched. Some say it came from a merchant in the Balkans. Others believe it was found inside a robe once worn by a woman who disappeared. The truth is not known, which makes it powerful. There's a table covered in amulets, copper discs etched with unreadable scripts, bone carvings strung on black thread, a small jar of honey containing a single black ant. These are traded among the women like currency, not for gold, for favor, for protection. You sit beside a woman rubbing saffron oil into her wrists. She tells you that when she was 12, a village healer told her never to sleep with her hair wet or her dreams would rot. She has followed the rule ever since. Even now, inside the finest palace in the empire, she looks at you and adds, "There's knowledge you don't challenge, you carry it." You nod, because what else can you do? In the palace, where every glance can carry envy and every scent can cause obsession, superstition becomes armor. These charms, odd, sometimes laughable, are survival tools. They offer control in a world where so much is dictated by invisible hands. The concubines do not all believe the same things. Some laugh at the pigeon feathers, others swear by them. But no one throws anything away. Not the dried lizard, not the crocodile powder, not even the pouch of ant-infused honey, because you never know what works. And sometimes, just carrying a charm is enough to make it true. You leave behind the animal charms and their watchful eyes, stepping deeper into the palace where the walls narrow and the shadows cling a little longer. This passage leads to the forgotten places, rooms bricked over, stairways that lead nowhere, doors that have not opened in decades. Tonight, one of those doors is ajar. You enter a small, windowless chamber, lit only by a single oil lamp hanging crooked from the ceiling. The walls are bare stone, cold to the touch, except for one section. There, just above waist height, are faint carvings, letters, symbols, names. You have discovered what some whispered about, but few ever confirmed: the forbidden lover's room. It is not large, no bed, no cushions, just a bench built into the wall and a thick rug worn smooth at the center. A table in the corner holds nothing now, but the marks in the dust suggest it once cradled candles, a bowl, perhaps ink. You reach out and run your fingers over the carved initials. One pair is entwined, S+R, framed in a tulip. Another is carved with a deliberate hand, a phrase in Ottoman script that roughly translates to, "In silence I saw you." Beneath it, another phrase, scratched in by a different hand, "We were seen." You are not imagining it. This was a meeting place, and not for the Sultan, not for the eunuchs. This was for lovers who should not have had each other at all. Men with men, women with women, concubines and servants, people whose desire did not fit the palace's mold but existed anyway, quietly, beautifully, and at great risk. Historians still argue whether this room was known to the palace or if it was built in secret by the women themselves. Some believe a sympathetic eunuch maintained it, keeping the door accessible, lighting the lamp. Others think it was uncovered by accident, used only briefly before being sealed again. But the writing on the wall tells its own truth. You kneel and inspect a line of poetry carved with care. It reads, "She kissed me with her eyes. Her hands dared not follow." Another line nearby is rougher, desperate. "They took her away before I could say goodbye." You pause. These are not fantasies. These are records. The closest thing these lovers had to immortality. Fun fact: Ottoman poetry, though highly regulated in public, was surprisingly full of coded references to same-sex longing. Poets used flowers, stars, and metaphors to veil what could not be spoken. A hyacinth might stand for a young man's curls, a reed flute for yearning. In the harem, these symbols filtered down into private conversation, and here, onto the walls. You notice something else: scorch marks along the stone. Faint but deliberate, lines made by oil or wax. You trace a half circle, a symbol of return perhaps, or a promise to meet again. One concubine's name appears repeatedly: Layla. Not the same Layla as the famous poem, but perhaps inspired by it. Her name is followed by initials that change: K, Z, H. Was she loved by many? Or did one lover record her name in different ways, unable to decide how best to remember her? You find a message carved so small you must lean in to read it. "We hid in plain sight." It strikes you as profound, because in this palace of constant watching, maybe the best hiding place was one no one thought to look at twice. A few items remain tucked in the corners of the room. A broken necklace, the thread worn and frayed. A scrap of silk with a kiss pressed in red pigment. A single sandal. All signs that someone left in a hurry or never returned. You imagine the lovers who passed through here, their stolen moments, their breath held between footsteps, the fear of discovery pressed against the spine like a blade. And still, they came. They kissed. They carved. They claimed this space as their own. One story survives among the eunuchs, told only in fragments. A favorite concubine fell in love with one of the washer girls. The two exchanged poems hidden in laundry baskets. One night, during a thunderstorm, they slipped away together, but someone noticed. The favorite was returned to her chambers. The washer girl was never seen again. For weeks afterward, the concubine would leave a clove on the windowsill each night, a symbol of memory and perhaps guilt. It is believed she carved one final message into this wall: "Your name remains, even when my mouth forgets." You run your hand across that line, and for a moment, you feel the heat of their hands beneath yours. You rise slowly. The room is quiet again, but not empty. It never will be. The carvings speak without voice. The air carries the ache of 100 unspoken goodbyes. You close the door behind you gently, though it wants to creak. You do not lock it. You leave it as you found it, as others did before. And as you walk away, you imagine someone else returning, maybe tonight, maybe in 100 years, someone who also loved in secret, someone who needed a place to be remembered. The palace shifts again beneath your feet, not physically but in tone. The stone under your soles feels warmer now, polished smooth by centuries of feet, dances and spinning bodies. You follow the faint trace of drumbeats, not martial, not festive, but hypnotic. You have arrived in the Sufi chamber. This is not part of the official harem complex. It lies just beyond it, where spiritual seekers and mystics gather. But the boundary is soft. Some concubines come here after dark, not for lessons, not for pleasure, but for something stranger, something sacred, or at least something that feels like it. The room is circular, its ceiling carved into a shallow dome, lit with lanterns that flicker like slow lightning bugs. A single reed flute plays in the corner, its sound thin and haunting. In the center, a man in white begins to spin. He is a dervish, a follower of the Sufi path. He twirls with his right palm lifted to the sky, his left turned toward the earth. His eyes are half closed. His robe billows out like a lily in slow bloom. And then, to your surprise, a woman joins him. She wears a veil over her face and a red sash around her waist. Her spins are slower, more grounded, but equally sure. Together, they move like the hands of a clock, always opposite, always connected. This is not a performance. This is devotion. Sufi practice in the Ottoman Empire was widespread, but not always welcomed by the state, especially when it blurred into sensuality, into poetry, into something harder to contain. Historians still argue whether the harem had formal links to Sufi lodges or whether concubines simply found their way here through private longing. But the evidence suggests they came. They came seeking stillness. They came seeking transformation. And sometimes, they came seeking one another. You listen as the dervish chants under his breath. Not words, not prayers, but syllables that vibrate in your chest. It's less about meaning than movement, breath as rhythm, voice as orbit. The woman's veil slips slightly as she turns. You see only her mouth. She is smiling. A eunuch seated nearby watches without expression. He says nothing, but his presence signals permission. No one is punished for being here. Not yet. Another concubine leans against a pillar, her fingers twined in prayer beads. She whispers, spinning, clears the heart, like rain over dust. Fun fact: many Sufi poems that now seem purely spiritual were once performed in the palace with subtle gestures that carried erotic weight, a raised eyebrow, a turn of the wrist, a pause on the word beloved. The concubines memorized them, repeating the verses aloud during rituals, uncertain whether they were worshipping the divine or each other. One poem, recited often, goes, "You touched my soul through silence. You became breath before I exhaled." You can see how the lines could go either way. You sit with a group of younger women, watching the dervish spin. They mimic his turns in small motions, as if practicing in secret. One of them whispers that she used to dance in her village's Sufi lodge before being taken by the Sultan's scouts. She says she still dreams in circles. There's a story among the concubines of a mystic who was summoned to the palace to bless a newborn prince. He stayed longer than expected. It was said he could read the air in a room, sense tension, detect longing. During his visit, one of the concubines followed him during his early morning walks. She asked no questions. He gave no answers. But when he left, he pressed a poem into her hand. It read, "Your soul does not belong here, but your courage does." She hid the poem in her pillowcase. Years later, it was found there, unreadable from time, but still scented faintly with clove. There are stories like that everywhere in this chamber. Not all of them pure, not all of them spiritual. There are rumors that some dervishes became lovers, not of the Sultan, but of those who watched them spin with such devotion that it unraveled something inside them. One eunuch told of a woman who attended every whirling session for months, saying nothing. Then one night, she danced into the circle and never stopped. She spun until her feet bled. She was not punished. She was carried back to her room in silence. Another concubine believed the rhythm of the Sufi drum could realign the body's desires. She timed her visits to the Sultan around the ceremonies. She said the night after the drum was struck 12 times, she felt the most alive. Her rivals scoffed until she was summoned 3 times in 1 week. You sit cross-legged now, your eyes half-lidded. The dervish's spin has slowed. The flute fades. The room quiets. You begin to understand. The Sufi presence in the palace is not rebellion. It is retreat, an escape from performance, a space where longing does not have to be rewarded, where beauty is not weighed. It is a place where even concubines can feel faceless, nameless, but not empty. As you rise to leave, a young woman presses something into your hand. It is a tiny circle drawn in ink on a piece of silk, a spiral, enclosed in petals. You ask what it means? She says softly, "It's the path that leads back to yourself." Then she turns and begins to spin. The air feels different now, thinner, more delicate as you ascend a set of narrow stairs leading away from the mystic rhythms of the Sufi chamber. Each step is etched with wear, polished by slippers and boots and bare feet alike. You emerge into a quiet salon, softly lit by glass lanterns that cast patterns on the ceiling like flowering vines. But this isn't a space for dance or ritual. This is a room for words. You've arrived at the court of the rose and the flame. It's not an official court, of course. No titles are exchanged here, no judgments passed. But power is still present, hidden in verses, tucked between metaphors, spoken gently, or not at all. This is where the Ottoman poets of the palace, many of them men who loved other men, gathered to share their longing through ink. And yes, the concubines came too, not as guests, as participants. A man in his 30s reclines near the window, a quill in his hand and a wine glass beside him, though it's filled only with pomegranate juice tonight. He wears a deep green kaftan with embroidery shaped like curling vines. You sense he's more performer than poet, but when he reads, the room listens. He begins with a verse, voice soft. His eyes were storms wrapped in velvet. I touched them only with silence. A murmur of appreciation ripples through the room. A concubine seated near the corner nods slowly, then closes her fan. This is how affection is traded here, not with kisses, but with couplets. Ottoman poetry, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, brimmed with homoeroticism. Scholars debate how literal it was. Were these metaphors for divine love or veiled confessions? Historians still argue whether poets like Baki and Nedim were expressing personal truths or simply mastering the art of suggestion. The answer may be both. You sit near a low table covered in scraps of paper. Some verses are incomplete, others are annotated. One reads, "I bowed not to the Sultan, but to the curve of his shadow." Another says, "He smiled once in my direction. My hands have not stopped trembling since." These are not jokes. These are not satire. They are ache, stitched into syllables. A young man dressed in pale blue rises to share his work. His voice shakes at first, then steadies. His poem is about a boy he once watched feeding birds on the palace roof. They never spoke. But every time he hears wings, he remembers the sound of that boy's shoes on tile. You notice a pattern now. In this room, no one uses names. All lovers are described in colors, scents, gestures. The anonymity is protective, yes, but also more intimate. You are not hearing gossip. You are being invited to witness a secret. Fun fact: the rose in Ottoman poetry is rarely just a flower. It often represents the beloved, usually male, and the thorn, the pain of separation. In some more daring poems, even the garden itself is coded, each plant representing a part of the body or a moment of contact. The flame, of course, is longing. What else could it be? A concubine near the fireplace pulls out a scroll and begins to read. Her voice is low, careful, practiced. She wrote no letters, only folded silks, scented with the grief she wore beneath her smile. Everyone is quiet after that. There's no applause here, only nods, raised brows, A slow inhale. A eunuch brings in a tray of tea spiced with cinnamon and clove. No one thanks him aloud, but several smile. He smiles back. That's enough. You begin to notice small things. One man taps his quill 3 times after every poem. A ritual. A protection. A woman writes her poems backward, in mirrored script, and reads them by candlelight reflected on a brass plate. Another carries her verses in her shoes, saying that if anyone reads them, they will at least be grounded in something real. You overhear a quiet conversation between 2 poets near the back of the room. One is asking the other for a specific word. Something that means I miss him, but I don't want him to know. The other suggests a Persian word you've never heard before. They try it out. It fits. A man enters late, his robe dusted with dried rose petals. He apologizes and offers a verse as penance. It is short. The door was locked, so I left my longing in the keyhole. Someone near the window laughs softly, not mockingly, in recognition. This room is not about seduction, not directly. It is about the impossibility of desire in a place where desire is currency, weapon, and wound. You glance at a small shelf holding wax seals, ink pots, and folded notes. These are drafts of letters never sent, or love poems turned into amulets. Some are burned after reading. Others are buried in the garden. One concubine reportedly wrote a new verse for every visit she was denied. After 7 years, she bound them into a book and buried it under a fig tree. The tree still blooms. There's one final poet tonight. He is older. His beard is streaked with white. He speaks without rising. His poem is barely a whisper. I loved him from the second balcony. He never looked up. I never looked away. No one says anything afterward. They don't need to. You rise quietly as the gathering dissolves. People return to their roles, their rooms, their masks. The poems remain behind, clinging to the cushions, the curtains, the flicker of candlelight on glass. And you understand, perhaps for the first time, that in this empire of rituals and roles, poetry was rebellion, and longing carefully, beautifully written was its language. You leave the poetry salon with a heart full of someone else's longing. The verses still linger in your mind like perfume, but the corridors ahead feel heavier. The lighting dims. The tiles lose their shine. The air is cooler now, and a silence presses in from the walls like a slow exhale. You are being led into one of the empire's most haunting institutions, the place where eunuchs began. It is not within the palace itself. This part of the story begins far from Topkapian markets. Markets you are never supposed to see. They were called castration markets. You find yourself standing in a room filled with ledgers, crates, and records that were never meant to be read aloud. The eunuchs of the Ottoman Empire, especially those who held power in the harem, did not arrive by choice. They arrived through unimaginable pain, through trade routes stained with silence. You open a ledger and read a line that freezes your blood. Boy, approx age 8, Nubian. Mild scarring. Healthy. Price. 1 bolt of silk, 1 silver ring. That boy may have lived. He may have risen to become one of the most powerful men in the palace. But this was how it started. Castration in the Ottoman context was a layered horror. Most eunuchs came from East Africa, trafficked through Red Sea ports and Arab intermediaries. The operation itself was often complete removal not just of the testicles but of the entire genital structure. The mortality rate was high. Some estimates say 9 out of 10 boys did not survive. Those who did were seen as chosen by God. That phrase appears more than once in the palace's old papers. It is not comforting. Historians still argue about how the Ottoman court reconciled this practice with Islamic law, which generally forbade bodily mutilation. Some scholars suggest legal loopholes were used. Others say it was a moral blind spot, excused by distance. The men who gave orders were rarely the ones holding the knife. You walk past a table with objects that seem ordinary brushes, robes, belts, but each one belonged to a eunuch whose life split into 2 halves, before the operation and after. One robe bears the initials of a chief eunuch who controlled the appointments of hundreds of concubines. His signature appears on documents alongside the Grand Vizier's, yet his past is unrecorded. His name before the palace was erased. A fun fact with sharp edges. Eunuchs were often renamed with titles like hadim, meaning servant. Some received nicknames based on the palace wing they managed. Others were simply called by numbers until they rose in rank. But inside these new names, old identities still lived. In private among themselves, some eunuchs kept stories alive. They whispered real names in their prayers, spoke the dialects of their mothers in hushed tones, kept scars covered not from shame, but from remembrance. In this part of the palace, you sense both reverence and regret. Reverence, because these eunuchs wielded immense influence. They were gatekeepers to the Sultan. They negotiated with ambassadors. They conducted espionage. They were feared, envied, and occasionally even loved. Regret, because every moment of that power was bought with irreversible sacrifice. There is a map on the wall showing trade routes. Red lines curve across Africa, through Egypt, up the Levant, and into the empire's heart. Each line, a silent thread weaving boys into men without pasts. You sit on a bench beside an older concubine, arranging old garments into bundles. She does not look up when she speaks. They never spoke of it, she says. But sometimes at night, when they thought no one heard, they would hum lullabies, songs not from here. She tells you of one eunuch who used to rub cardamom oil on his hands before reading official papers, not for scent, for memory. His mother had cooked with it. That was all he had left of her. You walk through another room where a series of ledgers record promotions. A boy named Hassan, brought in at age 7, rises to guard duty by 12. By 22, he is second in command of the harem. By 35, he disappears from the record. No explanation, just a gap. Some eunuchs were buried in the palace grounds with honor, others without ceremony. One story floats through the harem even now. A eunuch who fell in love with a concubine but never spoke it. When she died of illness, he refused to eat for 3 days. Not because he had hope, but because grief doesn't require consummation. You find a single page folded in the corner of the archive. It reads, "Do not mistake silence for consent. We are quiet only because we had no choice." The handwriting is old, faded, unattributed, and you know it must be left that way. As you return toward the warmer parts of the palace, you pass a long mirror. For a moment, you see yourself as they must have seen themselves, half in shadow, never whole, always watching. The harem called them guardians. History called them servants. But the truth is far more complicated. They were survivors, and they remembered everything. You step into a corridor that feels more like a breath held too long. After the weight of the eunuch's path, your lungs search for something lighter. But the scent here is strange, strong, spicy, sweet, and sharp all at once. It hits you before you see the source. You've entered the room of smoke and secrets, where contraception was prepared in whispers and wrapped in clove. The Ottoman harem may have been a space for desire, but it was also a space for control. And among the many things the concubines learned, preventing pregnancy when necessary was part of their education. A round table sits at the center of the room. On it lie bundles of herbs, pouches of powder, dried flowers, and small sticks no longer than your little finger. These are not cosmetics. They are contraceptives. Some ancient, some improvised, some surprisingly effective. You watch a concubine gently roll a small wax-coated stick between her palms, then dip it into a dish of infused oil. It glistens with a mixture of olive oil, pomegranate rind, and clove. She sets it aside to dry, then begins another. These vaginal inserts used hours before a potential summons were not officially recorded, but stories of them persist in oral histories and medical texts of the time. They were thought to work by altering the internal environment, making conception more difficult. In practice, no one knew for sure. But in a world where becoming pregnant could change your life or end it, any amount of control was power. A concubine tells you she uses smoke instead. She dries marjoram, mugwort, and mint, places them on a clay dish, and lets the smoke rise beneath her robes. Whether it works physiologically or only emotionally is unclear, but she claims she's never conceived. Then again, she's never been summoned. Historians still argue whether the palace midwives taught these methods or turned a blind eye to them. Officially, pregnancy by the Sultan was considered an honor, even a career move. But unofficially, the harem understood that not every child was a blessing. You sit with a woman crushing walnut shells into powder. She explains that mixing this with honey and applying it before intercourse was believed to prevent pregnancy. Another swears by aloe, soaked in vinegar and left to rest under moonlight. She's less confident in its function, but says it keeps the body balanced. A fun fact, among the most bizarre yet documented practices was the use of crocodile dung, as mentioned earlier, powdered and mixed with other herbs, then used in a manner best left to the imagination. It was believed to cool the womb, a phrase that appears in multiple manuscripts from Egypt to Istanbul. You pause beside a chest filled with oils, myrtle, pennyroyal, rue. These are not for perfume. These are for infusions, teas, and treatments. Some are sipped, some are bathed in. Some are left steaming in a bowl while the user kneels above it, letting the scent and vapors do what they might. A concubine named Nasira leans in and says quietly, "They say the Sultan once called a woman 3 times, and each time she drank a bitter tea before entering. She never conceived. He thought it fate. She thought it calculation." Another woman tells the opposite story. She wanted to conceive. She stopped the teas, burned her bundles of sage, slept beneath a fig tree. She conceived and died in childbirth. The child was raised by someone else. Her name is not remembered. You take a moment to look at a scroll pinned to the wall. It is a record of lunar phases and fertility cycles. Not medical, superstitious, but used religiously. The concubines tracked their cycles, not just for health, but for planning. Pregnancy brought attention, but also risk. One slip, one mistake, and your future became a child's, or no one's. You ask a concubine if she ever feared these methods would be discovered. She replies, "They only ask questions if you succeed." The room also contains other curiosities. A copper amulet said to prevent conception if worn around the ankle during sleep. A red ribbon to be tied under the bed. A mirror wrapped in cloth, placed face down before a visit, to confuse the body into seeing itself as already pregnant. Ridiculous? Perhaps. But when the stakes are that high, even myth becomes medicine. You glance at a parchment with a list of ingredients titled, "For Forgetting the Seed." It includes coriander, mint, powdered pearl, dried quince leaves, and cinnamon. The recipe ends with the note, "To be taken with hope and no regrets." One woman insists that it's not the herbs that work, but the intention. If you believe your body will not bloom, it stays a garden without roots, she says. You don't know whether to admire her or pity her. Perhaps both. A eunuch enters, collecting a tray of wrapped satchels. No words are exchanged. He knows what they are. He knows where they're going. He does not need to ask. As the room begins to quiet, a younger concubine approaches and offers you a thin scroll. It contains no recipe, no instruction, just a single line of poetry. "I gave him my body, but not my heir. That was mine." She folds it back and slips it into her sleeve. In a palace where every desire is managed and monitored, where even dreams are scheduled, the ability to decide when and whether to carry life is an act of radical agency. And sometimes, the greatest power a woman could wield was the quiet refusal to bloom. You leave the room of teas, oils, and powdered intent, with a new awareness, not of fear, exactly, but of how far someone will go to protect their own rhythm. The palace is quiet now. Candles burn lower. The marble floor feels cooler beneath your steps. But just as the air begins to settle, a scent reaches you. A scent so intense, so deliberate, it feels like someone's breath against your neck. You've entered the chamber of obsession. This room is smaller than the others, but every inch of it is saturated. The pillows, the curtains, even the paper stored in a corner drawer, all thick with perfume. the kind that clings not just to the skin but to the memory. This is where the concubines, and sometimes even the eunuchs, came to prepare the one thing that could rival beauty, charm, or even affection, a scent no one could forget. A concubine named Zeynep stands over a dish, gently warming a blend of myrrh, civet, clove, and orange blossom. She moves slowly, stirring the mixture in figure eights with a feather. Yes, a feather. It's part of the ritual. The perfume must be stirred gently to mimic the way desire should build, gradually then all at once. She tells you she's preparing yakan is, a name whispered like a warning. It means the trail that burns. Applied behind the ears and knees, it doesn't smell strong at first, but hours later, it reawakens, usually when no one expects it. Historians still argue whether these perfumes truly had chemical effects or whether their power was psychological. Some suggest the ingredients activated subtle changes in body temperature or mood. Others believe the real effect came from timing, layering, and belief. You watch as Zeynep dips a silk ribbon into the mixture, lets it soak, then hangs it over the lip of a polished mirror to dry. She plans to thread it through her sash tomorrow, just before a possible summons. The ribbon won't be noticed, but the scent, that will travel. Fun fact, in some parts of the palace, scented objects were banned outright. A robe that held a rival's perfume could trigger envy or even illness. There are recorded cases of concubines fainting simply from the scent another woman left behind on a seat cushion. Whether from reaction or performance, no one knows. The eunuchs eventually began rotating the seating in common rooms just in case. Another concubine prepares her blend using completely different ingredients: lavender, anise, and a trace of black musk. She insists this combination anchors the Sultan, makes him feel rooted, calm, steady. She only uses it when she wants to be remembered not for intensity, but for peace. She smiles and says, "Even storms get tired. Sometimes he wants the scent of shelter." In the far corner, one woman has gone too far. She wears a necklace soaked in vetiver and cinnamon, and her robe is lined with crushed amber. The combination is overwhelming. As she passes, people flinch. She doesn't care. She wants to make an impression no one can ignore, even if they hate it. Someone mutters, "She's become her own poison." You learn that some women use perfume offensively to unsettle rivals or disrupt visits. One story tells of a concubine who dabbed her wrists with essence of garlic and lemon peel just before her rival's meeting with the Sultan. The two passed in the corridor. The rival's visit ended early. Whether because of the smell or the suspicion, no one could say. The power of scent is not just about seduction. It's about territory. There's a record of a sultan who became so fixated on one woman's perfume that he refused to see her if she wore anything else. When she ran out of the ingredients, she tried to recreate it, but failed. She was never summoned again. She reportedly said, "He loved the scent, not the soul." You lean over a tray of oil-soaked cotton balls. One smells like firewood, another like cold fruit, a third like something unnameable, spicy and floral and bitter all at once. A eunuch tells you that this one was banned after it caused 3 arguments in 1 week. No reason, just tension. Everyone started accusing each other of stealing it. Some say it caused madness. Others say it just revealed what was already there. A shelf nearby holds bottles wrapped in silk, marked only by thread colors: red for memory, gold for lust, blue for sadness. A concubine selects one carefully, dabs it on a letter, then seals the envelope with wax. The scent will reach him before the words do. That is the point. Another woman smears oil along the inside of her robe, just at the shoulder. If he leans close, he will inhale it. If he doesn't, the scent stays hers alone. That is the balance. You find a folded note pressed between 2 jars of rose attar. It reads, "If you forget my name, remember the wind that followed you from the garden. That was me." You place the note back. There's a woman sitting in front of a mirror, applying scent drop by drop to her temples. She says nothing. She meets your gaze and smiles. "He never saw me," she whispers, "but he always turned his head when I entered." And isn't that a kind of victory? You leave the chamber carrying something that doesn't belong to you, a scent you didn't choose. It will cling to your robe. It will linger in your dreams, because that's what it's meant to do, not to be noticed once, but to haunt. The scent still follows you as you move on, haunting, insistent, like a whisper that refuses to fade. But now the palace turns colder, the walls narrower, the lanterns fewer. You are entering a realm where no one speaks unless spoken to, where every movement is deliberate and soundless. This is the domain of the mute servants. They are not eunuchs, not concubines, not poets, mystics, or dancers. They are the ones who observe, assist, remember, and forget. You step into a chamber where three of them move silently around a long divan, adjusting cushions, lighting a single lamp, then stepping back into shadow. They wear no embroidery, no jewels, no distinguishing marks. Even their expressions are neutral. This is by design. They are the voiceless stagehands of the harem's intimate theatre. Trained from childhood, most of these servants came from outside the empire, captured, purchased, or born into the system. They were chosen for their silence, and in many cases, made that way. Some were born mute, others were rendered so through unspeakable means. Historians still argue whether the Ottoman court preferred natural muteness or imposed it as a form of control. Some records suggest both. What's certain is that these servants were prized for one thing above all: their inability to speak of what they saw, and they saw everything. Tonight, you watch as one folds a robe that still holds the scent of amber. Another places a tray of rosewater and candied ginger on a low stool. A third straightens the corner of the rug, then disappears behind a curtain without a single sound. Every movement is elegant, exact, practiced. This is not servitude, it is choreography. A eunuch once wrote in his journal, "The mute servants are like air present in every room, yet noticed only when missing." That may sound poetic, but it's also true. You notice a concubine seated nearby, watching the silent flurry. She sips tea and says softly, "They are our ghosts, our shadows. If I scream, they don't hear it, but they still bring water." She tells you of one mute servant who witnessed a jealous concubine slip something bitter into a rival's sherbet. He did nothing, said nothing. But that evening, he served the guilty woman her own tea, without the sugar she always demanded. A message, sent silently. No one ever asked how he knew. Fun fact: mute servants were often used to rehearse scenes of intimacy before a concubine's first summons. They would stand in as the Sultan, responding with silence, while the woman practiced gestures, timing, tone. They gave no feedback. Their stillness was the mirror. One concubine named Razieh practiced with the same mute servant for months. She said his silence taught her more about desire than any tutor ever had. "I learned to listen to what isn't said," she told someone once. "That's how I survived." You find a set of illustrated cards stacked near a basin. Each one bears a different gesture: an open palm, a bowed head, a turned ankle. These are part of a silent language developed within the palace. Mute servants used them to communicate with one another. A hand pressed to the chest meant gratitude. 2 fingers on the forehead meant warning. A single blink meant, "Do not ask." No one outside their circle ever fully learned it. You sit near a wooden box containing scraps of cloth. Some are torn from old garments, others are patches soaked in scent. These were used by mute servants to remember who belonged to whom. If a concubine had a distinctive perfume, a servant might keep a piece of it, hidden, to avoid confusion. It was a personal archive, a diary without ink. One eunuch swore he saw a mute servant cry once, just once, after a concubine was dismissed. He wept silently, facing the wall. When asked why, he simply placed his hand over a folded kerchief. It held a single embroidered letter. Perhaps it was love, perhaps it was routine. But in this place, routine often becomes ritual. You glance at a cloth on a table that seems recently used. The scent is familiar frankincense and clove, the same one you smelled 2 rooms ago. A concubine's robe, prepared for the Sultan. Folded, fresh, scented, and delivered. No note, no announcement, just an offering, wrapped in stillness. You wonder how many moments these servants carried in silence, how many secrets were pressed into their palms, never to be spoken again. One woman swears she once confided a dream to a mute attendant. The next day, the same flowers from her dream appeared in her room. No one else knew. She never spoke to him again. That was her thank you. There's a final story passed through the harem. A mute servant once stopped a suicide. A concubine, having fallen from favor, prepared to take poison. The servant who entered her room noticed. He did not shout. He did not run. He walked slowly to her side, knelt, and placed her veil back over her hair. Then he took her hand and pressed it to his own chest. She lived. He never returned to her chamber, and neither of them ever told the story. You watch now as the final lamp in the room is extinguished. The servants file out one by one, their footsteps softer than breath. No eye contact, no farewell, only presence, then absence. In a palace overflowing with performance, power, and pride, the mute servants offered something rare, a kind of witnessing so complete it no longer required sound. The corridors beyond the mute servants' domain are colder, narrower, and quieter still. You pass through a series of archways where no laughter echoes, where the perfume has faded, and where even the candles seem hesitant to burn too brightly. The rhythm of the harem has shifted, because tonight, the Sultan has stopped sleeping. You arrive at the outer edge of his private wing. The guards are posted, as always, but their eyes are more alert. Their fingers twitch over the hilts of their blades. Inside, something is different. The palace whispers tell you that the ruler, once intoxicated by scent and silk and poetry, has withdrawn. The rumors say he has refused intimacy for weeks. Some say months. No concubines are summoned. The eunuchs wait each evening in silence. The baths are still warm. The sheets are still folded. But the Sultan no longer calls. Historians still argue about the causes of such dry seasons. Some blame illness, or superstition, or political crisis. Others point to heartbreak, a favorite lover exiled or dead. A few believe the Sultan simply grew weary of bodies that always responded but never surprised him. Tonight, the harem is restless. Not frantic, but tense. You enter a room where concubines sit in silence. No instruments are being played, no oils being prepared. Instead they sew, slowly, carefully, each stitch a delay, each gesture a question left unanswered. One concubine folds her robe neatly and places it in a lacquered chest. She tells you she hasn't seen the Sultan's door open in 43 nights. She says the garden flowers have begun to wither, that the eunuchs sweep the same steps again and again just to stay busy. Another says she saw the Sultan walking the hall alone at dawn, bareheaded, his robe dragging behind him like a curtain. She swears his eyes were red, not with drink, but with something older. Grief, maybe? Or fear? A eunuch brings word that the Sultan has ordered all mirrors removed from his bedchamber. He no longer wishes to see himself. This has happened before. During a past reign, one Sultan forbade any reflections near him after he dreamed of his own death in a polished bowl of water. A fun fact: in some records, there are accounts of sultans who turned to abstinence as a form of discipline. They believed withholding pleasure would sharpen the mind, cleanse the soul, or prevent manipulation from ambitious lovers. Some even kept tallies of how long they resisted. The longest known, 93 days. And yet, when the tension builds too long, it always breaks. You find yourself inside a chamber, once used for private readings. The scrolls are untouched, the cushions covered. But in one corner, a concubine is practicing how to walk. Slowly, not seductively. Not provocatively, just with presence. She says if he returns, she wants him to remember what a woman looks like when she is not asking to be seen. There's a story circulating among the women. The Sultan had a nightmare. Not of war, not of betrayal, but of standing in a room filled with every concubine he had ever summoned. And not one of them turned to face him. He woke trembling. Since then, he has refused all company. Another rumor. A physician warned him of declining vitality, that too much indulgence could shorten his life. The Sultan, now gripped by the fear of death, sleeps alone to preserve his time, as if solitude were a cure. One concubine, bold-eyed and sharp-tongued, says softly, "He is not afraid of dying. He is afraid of being forgotten by someone who once looked at him like a god." She turns back to her embroidery, a single black thread running through a field of red. You're shown a hidden alcove where gifts are still prepared, not offered, just prepared, as if waiting for the wind to change. Rosewater candies, silk belts, perfume in glass bottles sealed with wax. Every night, someone lights a candle in this room and waits. And every night, it burns down alone. One eunuch tells you of a night long ago when a different sultan vanished from his own bed. They found him sleeping on the stone floor of the prayer chamber. He said he was tired of being touched by hands that were always soft, but never sincere. You wonder if that's what has happened again. The sultan still eats, still bathes, still signs documents, but the women in the harem say they feel a fog settling, as if his attention, once the sun they all turned toward, has vanished behind a permanent cloud. In the final room you visit, a woman sits alone with a reed flute in her lap. She doesn't play it, just holds it. She whispers, "When he sleeps again, the palace will breathe again." You nod, though you're not sure it's true, because when a sultan stops sleeping, the harem doesn't just lose its rhythm, it loses its purpose. Desire becomes decor, ritual becomes routine, and all the threads of performance unravel into silence. You exit quietly, careful not to wake anyone who pretends to rest. Outside, the sky over Topkapi is starless, and somewhere in the palace, a man lies awake, surrounded by everything he once wanted, and nothing he can touch. The palace does not sigh, but it certainly holds its breath. With the sultan withdrawn and the nights growing heavier, something else begins to stir in the harem. Not despair, not mourning, something far older. Older than empire, older than law. Revenge. You follow the scent of sandalwood and sugar into a part of the harem you haven't seen before. It feels like a sitting room at first pillows, a fountain, soft lamplight. But there is tension here, like a still pool waiting for a single drop. She is seated near the center, not the most beautiful woman in the room, but the most still, the most dangerous, the favorite. Or at least, she used to be. Her name is whispered now, not spoken aloud. She was once the sultan's knightly choice, held in silk, gifted with sapphires, protected by the chief eunuch himself. But since his retreat into silence, her status has eroded. Other women, younger, newer, are being groomed, and she knows it. Tonight, she is stirring honey into a small bowl of sherbet, not for herself, not for pleasure, but for something else. It smells like rose, but it tastes off. You watch her, dip her finger into it, test it, smile faintly. Revenge in the harem doesn't arrive as daggers or screams. It arrives as sweetness, silence, misdirection. Historians still argue how much real danger passed through the harem halls. Was there actual poisoning, actual sabotage, or was it all rumor and tension magnified by competition? The evidence is slim, but the stories persist. One favorite once replaced a rival's perfume with a bitter oil made from mustard seed and vinegar. The sultan recoiled from the smell. She was never summoned again. Another bribed a mute servant to swap out rose petals in a rival's bath for dried onion skins. It caused a rash. It caused whispers. It caused exile. You watch as the current favorite wraps a parcel in silk. Inside it, a robe meant for one of the new girls. A gift, supposedly. But beneath the silk is a small sachet filled with ground walnut shells, harmless, except when rubbed against skin made sensitive by bath oils. She knows it will irritate, maybe blister. just enough to make her rival nervous. Make the eunuchs take notice. She'll itch at the wrong moment. The favorite says without looking at you, and the Sultan notices everything. This is not cruelty for fun. This is strategy. Another concubine nearby whispers about a favorite from years ago who, when cast aside, trained herself to weep silently on command. During one feast, she sat just within the Sultan's line of sight and let a single tear roll down her cheek. He summoned her again. The women called her the one who cried herself back to power. You pass a tapestry and hear a hissed argument behind it. Two concubines, former allies, now accusing each other of sabotage. One's favorite mirror has gone missing. The other's prayer beads were found soaked in salt water. A eunuch quietly enters and sets down a sealed bowl of fruit. The favorite arches a brow. "I didn't ask for pears," she says. "I know," the eunuch replies, then vanishes. Later, you learn the pears are symbolic associated with barrenness. A message from someone in the kitchen, or maybe the Sultan himself. Either way, she doesn't eat them. Fun fact: a superstition in the harem claimed that if a woman placed a strand of her hair into another's pillow stuffing, it would cause her dreams to turn sour. Sleeplessness meant anxiety. Anxiety meant mistakes. Mistakes meant opportunity. And so, they plucked hair not just from themselves, but from others. The favorite rises now and walks slowly to a shelf of small jars. She selects one with a pale green tint and opens it. Inside is a blend of mint and crushed rosehip, used to cool skin. She dabs it behind her ears, under her collarbone, at the curve of her wrist. The same places she used to place her most beloved perfume. She says quietly, "He liked this smell when he liked me. Let's see if it works again." Her tone is even, but you hear the blade beneath it. Another concubine sits across the room, pretending to read. Her fingers tremble slightly. She knows she's being watched. She knows her rise has cost someone else everything. You leave the room before the confrontation begins. But as you go, you pass a folded note pressed into the crevice of a marble niche. It reads, "She who is forgotten can still make herself remembered." You do not know who wrote it. You do not need to. In a palace ruled by silence and submission, revenge becomes poetry, delicate, slow, scented, served cold in a bowl of sherbet. And the favorite, once discarded, is simply rewriting her story. Not with forgiveness, with precision. Some stories end with silence, others with sherbet. But this one continues down a hallway that bends gently east, where the scent of smoke curls through the air, and shadows flicker against walls painted centuries ago. You've arrived at the Room of Omens. It is not an official part of the harem. In fact, no one admits it exists. And yet, here it is, curtains drawn, candles low, a mirror blackened with soot, and a circle of women seated cross-legged on faded carpets. They don't speak, not yet. Their eyes are closed, and their fingers rest on stones, string, or folded scraps of silk. This is where the concubines come to predict what cannot be asked aloud. No prayers, no supplications. This is not religion. This is magic. The woman leading the circle is old, older than anyone else in the harem by decades. Her skin is like paper stretched thin over the memory of bone. No one calls her by name. She is simply the oracle. She lights a small flame in a shallow bowl of water, then places her hand above it. Her palm trembles slightly. The others mimic her. Together, they whisper something in a language you don't recognize. Then silence. One concubine drops 3 pomegranate seeds onto a tray. Where they land determines whether she'll be summoned next week. Another burns the corner of a silk scarf and watches how the smoke rises. A third unfolds a strip of paper with random syllables and rearranges them into a sentence. You understand, suddenly, that these women are not just interpreting fate, they are trying to control it. Historians still argue whether such rituals had any widespread structure or were cobbled together from local traditions: Persian, Arabic, Slavic, Anatolian. Likely a mixture. What is certain is that superstition was not confined to peasants. Even behind the finest curtains, fear wore many faces. And fear needs rituals. A concubine named Halime explains that she once dreamed of a red moon and told no one. The next day, her closest friend was dismissed after being caught spying on the Sultan's secretary. Coincidence? Maybe. But Halime still leaves a piece of red thread under her pillow every night. Fun fact: one common omen involved lemon seeds. Cut a lemon in half and count the seeds inside. An even number meant protection. An odd number meant betrayal. If a seed floated in your tea, you were being watched. You move to the window, where a small tray holds mirrors, some broken, some clouded with smoke. The oracle selects one and holds it up to a concubine who has remained silent all evening. She is younger than the rest. Her hands shake. She has a question she can't speak aloud. The mirror fogs. The oracle nods. The girl begins to cry. No one asks why. You're shown a cloth bag filled with small bones, bird, rodent, fish. These are rolled like dice across a mat. The position of the bones predicts outcomes. A clean line across the edge of the mat means delay. A scatter means danger. A spiral means love returned. One woman keeps a feather wrapped in a fig leaf in her sash. She says it came from a bird that landed on her windowsill the night before her first summons. She believes it carries her fate. She has never shown it to anyone until now. Another pulls you aside and reveals a pouch of salt and rose petals. She places it in her bath before visiting the Sultan, not to entice him, but to keep herself calm. She says it wards off the thoughts that try to undo you. You glance toward the curtain and notice marks etched into the wood scratches, almost, or symbols. Tiny stars, crescents, numbers, a map of past rituals, a timeline of uncertainty. There's a myth among the concubines that once, a woman successfully predicted the exact night the Sultan would fall in love with her. She prepared everything in advance. The scent, the robe, the phrase she would use. And it happened just as the bones foretold. She was adored, then ignored. She never predicted when it would end. The oracle moves slowly now, reaching for a clay bowl filled with blackened water. She dips her fingers and flicks droplets across the room. No one flinches. It's a blessing, or a warning, maybe both. One concubine asks if the Sultan will return to his senses. Another asks whether a certain rival will fall from favor. A third asks wordlessly whether she should try to leave the palace. The oracle looks at each in turn. Then she holds up 3 fingers. The answers are yes, no, and not yet. No one knows which is which. A gust of wind presses against the curtain. The flame flickers. Someone begins humming low, tuneless, a rhythm without words. The circle breaks. The women rise, wrap their shawls, and leave one by one. No one speaks. You're the last to stand. The oracle catches your gaze, just for a moment. Then she holds out her hand. In it is a piece of thread, frayed, gold, warm to the touch. She closes your fingers over it. You'll understand when you forget what you wanted, she whispers. Then she too disappears into the dark. Outside, the sky has cleared. The palace exhale has begun again. Somewhere, something is shifting. And the women of the harem? They'll be ready. It is well past midnight now. The palace has settled into its uneasy rhythm once again, but something in the air has shifted. You feel it as you pass. The sleeping chambers' doors closed, oil lamps flickering, bodies arranged like questions no one dares to ask. And then you hear it, the unmistakable sound of laughter. Not polite, not restrained, real, bubbling, risky laughter. You follow it down a hallway you've somehow never noticed before, tucked behind a linen storage room and hidden by a half-pulled curtain. The walls are painted in colours richer than the rest of the harem, deep plum, gold, and crimson, and lanterns here burn with tinted glass, casting purple shadows across the floor. You've entered the midnight salon. This is the space where the concubines go, when they are not performing, when they are not planning, when they are not pleasing or praying or plotting. This is where they come to remember who they were before the harem, and maybe, who they still are beneath the roles. A group of women sit in a loose circle, robes untied, hair unbraided, posture relaxed. One is plucking a string instrument lazily. Another has her feet in a basin of warm water. A third is applying ash to her teeth, not for cleaning but as part of a joke. She grins and makes a face, and the room explodes with laughter again. This is not what you expected. One woman notices you watching. You thought we whispered all the time, she says. That we only moved in silence and smelled like rosewater. She rolls her eyes. We are still women. We're just women who've memorized 100 ways to keep a secret. The woman beside her adds, and 100 more to tell a joke that won't get you killed. Tonight, the jokes fly freely. You hear one about a eunuch who mistook lemon balm for mint and served a calming tea to the Sultan's entire guard. The whole unit fell asleep before dinner. No one was punished. But for weeks after, the concubines left lemons on their trays as a reminder. Another woman tells a story about a concubine who pretended to faint during a dance just so she could be carried by the Sultan's most handsome guard. She ended up with a bruised hip and an invitation to perform again. She never faked anything after that. There's a kind of irreverence here. Not disrespect, but release. The pressure that builds all day, all week, all year must go somewhere. Historians rarely write about this room. It appears only in a single passing note in a servant's account. The women gather past the bells when the guards grow drowsy and the moon is high. They speak as though they were never chosen. And maybe that's what this room is. A space outside choosing, where you don't have to be the favorite or the forgotten, the clever or the quiet. You can just be. A fun fact, the midnight salon had its own rituals. Not religious, not romantic, just human. One woman would recite tongue twisters. Another would braid a stranger's hair while blindfolded. There was a game involving walnuts, balance, and a small spoon that no one remembers the rules to anymore, but they still play it anyway. Tonight, the theme is stories. But not tragic ones, not palace ones, stories from before. One woman shares how she used to climb almond trees barefoot. Another says she once tricked her brothers into thinking a goat could predict the weather. A third describes the taste of snow from her village, so different from the snow in Istanbul, she claims, that it might as well be from another world. You notice that no one interrupts here. No one competes. Each story is given space, as if the telling itself is sacred. You sit beside a woman whose voice is low and raspy. She's older, maybe not summoned anymore, but she carries herself like she owns the room. She tells you this was the only place she ever cried. Not when she arrived, not when she was passed over, but here, during a story about a dog she left behind. A small, ridiculous dog with 3 legs and no tail. I don't know why that broke me, she says, but it did, and someone brought me tea, and no one asked anything. And then we played the walnut game, and I laughed again. You realize that this is a kind of rebellion too. Not the sharp kind, not sabotage, but resistance through joy, through memory, through refusal to let the palace take everything. A younger concubine is being taught a dance step, one that's never performed for the Sultan. Too silly, she's told. But here, it makes everyone giggle. She keeps getting it wrong on purpose, just to hear them laugh. Someone brings out a small pot of jam, plum, maybe, or cherry. It's passed around with a single spoon. Each woman takes a taste. No one hoards, no one comments. It's just sweetness, shared without condition. You hear someone whisper, "The Sultan has a new favorite." Another replies, "We all do. Once. Or not at all." And then they keep laughing. You stay longer than you meant to. The hour grows late. The stories grow softer. Someone sings a lullaby from the western provinces, and another hums along in harmony. Eyes begin to close. Not in sadness. In peace. There's a blanket in the corner made of stitched-together silk scarves, each one a cast-off from a former gift or costume. It's warm. It smells like nothing you can name. You wrap it around your shoulders before you leave, because you realize something. In a palace obsessed with performance, sometimes the most radical act is to let yourself laugh. Even at midnight, dawn approaches. You feel it in your bones more than your eyes, though the sky outside still hangs dark, and the palace windows remain mirrors to their own secrets. You return now to the inner gardens, where the air is thicker with dew and memories than with fragrance. The courtyards are empty. The fountains trickle softly, like they've been whispering all night and have finally run out of things to say. You've arrived at the place no one dares to claim, the Garden of the Forgotten. It's not a garden by design. It's where overgrown vines crawl up broken latticework, where moss pushes through cracked tile, where the hibiscus blooms only at the far edges, as if even it is unsure it wants to stay. No formal path leads here, and yet everyone in the harem knows it exists. This is where the women who were never summoned, never chosen, sometimes wandered at night. Not to mourn, not exactly, just to feel the open sky and remind themselves they still had faces. You sit on a worn stone bench beside an abandoned incense burner, its base etched with a name so faded it looks like wind. The name doesn't matter, only that someone once carved it here, probably with a spoon. There are no rules in this garden, no performances, no silk robes or braided crowns, just women wrapped in shawls, their hair loose, eyes open but not looking at anything in particular. One such woman sits across from you now. She doesn't flinch when you arrive. She doesn't smile either. She simply exhales. "I've been here 6 years," she says. "He's never said my name." She holds up a dried pomegranate peel like it's a relic. "I ate this the night I arrived. Thought it meant something." She tosses it behind her. It didn't. Another concubine once called this space the unwritten chapter. She came here every time someone else was chosen. After each rejection, she left a small stone beneath the olive tree. When she was eventually dismissed from the harem, there were 48 stones. She took none of them with her. Historians don't talk about these women. The unremarked, the unchosen, the silent third row in the painting, the ones who neither schemed nor seduced, who simply existed in the margins until the empire no longer had use for them. But the garden remembers. There are whispers of one concubine who sang to the lilies at night. They say the lilies bloomed faster that year. Another woman wrote entire poems in the dirt with a hairpin, only to erase them with her sleeve before dawn. She never spoke them aloud. She said, "If no one hears, maybe no one will steal." You notice a small collection of trinkets near the base of a broken pillar. A bead, a folded note, a piece of thread, a chicken bone, a coin from a province that no longer exists. Offerings, maybe. Or leftovers. Or both. A fun fact. Concubines who were never summoned were often reassigned after years of waiting, married off to lower officials, gifted to allies, or simply dismissed. Some adjusted. Others vanished. The harem kept no ledger for disappointment. One woman near the fountain wears a shawl the color of moonlight. She used to be a musician. She still plays sometimes, tapping rhythm into the stone with her fingers. "It's not for anyone," she says. "It's just so I don't forget what sound feels like." Another is a painter. She stains her fingertips with crushed berries and presses them to scraps of cloth she hides beneath her mattress. One night she told the sky, "If I'm not remembered, let me at least leave a shape." You reach out to trace the rim of the fountain. There's a name carved there, one you recognize from a past tale, the girl who once wept herself into favor. Apparently, she wept herself right back out again. This is where she came afterward. Saturday beside the lilies. Watched the moths eat through the edges of her silks. One night she said aloud, "I was not built for waiting." She never said anything else. The women here speak in fragments, glances, snatches of old songs, but there is no bitterness. Not anymore. That stage passes. Then comes the stillness. You sit a while longer. You notice that even the air is different here. Less perfumed, more honest. Someone begins humming. It's a lullaby from childhood, a tune too old to be fashionable, too soft to be theatrical. One by one the women join in, not in harmony, not in rhythm, just together. Loose, imperfect, human. This garden will never appear in official records. No marble will be carved in its honor. But here, among the cracks and curls of jasmine gone wild, is where the truth of the harem lives. Not in seduction, not in power, but in what remains when no one is watching. You rise quietly, not to leave, just to remember. The sky has begun its slow transformation, that tender shift from black to indigo that only the patient ever see. The palace is not yet awake, but it has started dreaming again, sighing under doors, rustling in curtains, pacing in rooms where sleep never quite arrived. You return to the upper hallways, where the Sultan's private quarters await the next night's decisions. But tonight, he is not there. Instead, a room has been prepared elsewhere further in, deeper, lit by oil lamps that flicker like stars over water. The walls here are not decorated with gold, but with stories, carved, painted, whispered. This is the final chamber of the night. You enter and see only two people. A eunuch, old and calm, seated beside a concubine whose robe is midnight blue. She holds a set of prayer beads in one hand and a small wooden box in the other. They are not speaking. You approach quietly. The eunuch looks up and gestures toward the floor, inviting you to sit. The woman does not glance your way, but her fingers begin to move. She opens the box. Inside are letters, dozens of them, folded, worn, some stained with tears, others with oil or wax. None of them are addressed, all of them written, to the Sultan, but never sent. She selects one and begins to read. Her voice is even unadorned. You asked me once why I never looked at the moon. It's because I could never compete with something so distant. But tonight I looked, and it was smaller than I remembered. She folds it again and places it to the side. Another woman joins the room, then another. Soon, there are 7. Each one carries her own letter. Some read theirs aloud. Others burn them in the flame. The smoke curls into patterns too subtle to describe. You sit in silence, absorbing every word, every absence. One letter reads, "You never knew the name of the girl who brought you figs, but I remember the exact sound of your voice when you said thank you." Another, "You gave me one night. I gave you 5 years. I don't think the math favors me. This is not a ritual. It's not protest either. It's closure, performed in the only way allowed." Historians still argue whether concubines were permitted to write to the Sultan. Some suggest formal letters were passed through eunuchs. Others believe they were discouraged, unless specifically requested. What is certain is that many women wrote anyway, and those words, though never read, became a form of power no one could strip from them. A fun fact: among the secret archives of the palace, researchers once found a bundle of unsigned notes, all written in the same hand, addressed simply, "To the night." Some speculate they were copied from concubines' diaries. Others say they were written by a eunuch who fell in love from a distance. Tonight, in this chamber, no names are spoken, no roles are assigned. Each woman is just a voice, a presence, a breath in the dark. One concubine writes a new letter on the spot, her ink pale and her strokes hesitant. She folds it into the shape of a swan and sets it afloat in a shallow bowl of water. It tips, floats, then slowly sinks. She nods. "That's the answer I needed." You notice that none of the letters speak of anger. There is longing, yes, regret, sorrow, but no bitterness. It seems that after everything, after silks and scents and sabotage, the most enduring feeling left behind is tenderness. You step aside to give space. There is one final letter left unopened. The old eunuch reaches for it. His hands shake slightly. He unfolds it slowly, reverently, and reads, "I never touched you, but I held every version of you in my mind. I hope someone loved the one you became." He closes his eyes. The room is silent. For a moment, it feels as if the palace itself is listening, not judging, just listening. The letters are gathered again, some placed back in the box, others left on the windowsill, where the breeze might take them. Before you leave, the eunuch hands you a scrap of parchment. It is not a letter, just a line. The stories we don't get to finish still shape us. You hold it tightly, because here, at the very end of the night, in a chamber carved from memory, you have learned the final truth of the Ottoman harem. It was not a place of cruelty or beauty alone. It was a place of voices, some raised, some lost, and some written in silence. The palace begins to stir again. In the distance, the first bell rings a low, hollow sound meant to rouse servants gently. But for you, it marks the end. Not of the palace, not of the harem, but of the night that held you in its velvet grip. You walk once more through the corridors, your footsteps soft now, like your very presence has learned to tiptoe. Around you, the empire exhales. The lamps are being trimmed. The water in the fountains regains its sparkle. Somewhere, tea is being poured, and a eunuch clears his throat for the first time in hours. You return to the main atrium, and everything looks exactly as it did when you arrived. But it feels different, because now you see through it. You see the silk and gold and incense for what they are, not just opulence, but armor. Not just tradition, but camouflage. This was never about beauty. It was always about survival. You remember the concubine with the perfume that came back to life after hours, the favorite who weaponized a robe, the mute servant who comforted without words, the girl who never saw the Sultan's face but still folded love into a napkin, the oracle, the unchosen, the women who left letters behind like breadcrumbs through history. And you realize that this is the lesson of the harem. Power is not always loud. Sometimes it is patient. Sometimes it wears a veil. Sometimes it hums lullabies to itself at midnight while everyone else sleeps. Historians will continue to argue about what the harem was. Was it a prison, a paradise, a court of intrigue, or a stage of manipulation? The truth is that it was all of those. And none of them, because at the heart of the Ottoman harem were not myths or rules or jewels. There were people, living, longing, surviving, dreaming, just like you. And now, it's time to leave. But before you do, you step outside one last time, into the garden. The early light has returned, soft, pale, forgiving. You see one of the unchosen women sitting under a fig tree. She's not crying, not even praying. She's just still. She looks up and sees you, nods, then closes her eyes again. And somehow, that simple moment holds more power than all the golden gates and velvet cushions combined. Because the story of the harem was never about what happened behind closed doors. It was always about what remained, what refused to be erased, what still lingers in the scent of jasmine and ink, in the corner of a mirror, in the crease of a letter that never reached its destination. And now, as the world brightens just a little, and the palace turns its gaze toward a new day, you carry that memory with you, not as a burden, as a gift. And now, my friend, as the first rays of morning peek through the curtains of memory, you can finally rest. You've wandered through candlelit corridors and sat with women who once thought they were forgotten. You've listened to stories no history book could ever quite hold, and in doing so, you've touched something real fragile, powerful, and painfully human. Close your eyes just for a moment, and picture the garden again. The way the dew clings to the stone, how the wind traces invisible poems through the trees. Let the memory of soft voices wrap around you like a shawl, stitched with laughter, perfume, and longings that never made it to paper. You are safe now. The palace is behind you. The night has done its work. Breathe slower. Let go of the sharp corners and shadows. Let the sound of fountains and faraway flutes lull you into stillness. Because the stories you carry tonight are not heavy. They are light as rose petals, weightless as secrets kept out of love, or necessity, or quiet defiance. And wherever you are, whatever your sky looks like right now, know this. You have not just heard history. You've been a part of it. So rest easy. The candles are out. The voices are quiet. And the moon, finally, is smiling. Sweet dreams.